Hey guys, tonight we're slipping off our shoes and stepping into the sands of ancient Egypt. The sun has just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, and there's a strange stillness in the air. The Nile glimmers in the distance, like a sleeping serpent, and somewhere far off, a priest chants to statues with eyes that never blink. You feel the heat of the day lingering in the stone beneath your feet, and in front of you, looming majestic and eerily permanent, is a tomb, not a temple, not a palace, but a house for the dead carved with care and packed with goods. That's right. You've arrived in a world where the dead live better than most of the living, where someone might spend decades building their tomb long before deciding where to build their home. You're here to see why the ancient Egyptians were so obsessed with what comes after life. And fair warning, if you don't have your heart weighed just right, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing our little sleepy time map grow. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly through a dusty necropolis, more like a neighborhood of the dead. No spooky vibes, surprisingly. The breeze carries more sand than scent, and the flat-topped mastabas stretch in tidy rows. Tombs, dozens, maybe hundreds of them. You expect temples to God's grand halls, to honor Ra or Isis or Horus, but what you find are tombs. Big ones, small ones, some that look like sunken homes with false doors. And if you peek inside, you won't find bones or moldy scrolls. You'll find color, bright blues and reds, and ochres still clinging to the stone after thousands of years, because this was priority number one: build a place where your soul could crash for eternity. The house of your forever self. It sounds a little extravagant until you remember the afterlife to an Egyptian wasn't a vague maybe. It was an inevitability. You were going to die, but that wasn't the end. You were going to live again, forever. So naturally, your eternal pad had to be tricked out. And unlike modern estate agents, ancient Egyptians weren't looking for open concept living spaces or great natural light. They were looking for orientation with the stars perfectly aligned burial shafts, magical protection etched into walls, and enough storage space for food, beer, and statues of servants. This priority is ancient, older than the pyramids. Go back to 3100 BCE, and you'll find mastabas dotting the royal cemeteries. The name mastaba even comes from the Arabic for bench, since they look like big rectangular blocks squatting on the earth. These were the first real attempts at permanent death real estate. Mud brick at first, then stone as wealth and ambition grew. Temples came later. That's right, worship came after the obsession with death. The gods themselves in stone form were still warming up while the mortuary industry was booming. You weren't getting pyramid-sized statues for Osiris yet, but someone's grandma already had a wall painting of herself enjoying the afterlife with a fresh duck in one hand and a harp player at her side. Mainstream historians agree tombs came first. Some scholars even argue this whole civilization may have crystallized around death. It wasn't just about loss, it was about continuity. Death didn't mean disappearance. It meant movement, one long, dusty hike into the next life. But here's where it gets weirder. Some of the earliest tombs weren't just ceremonial. People were actually buried with their servants, or their pets, or their favorite dancers. You might think that's sweet until you realize the servants didn't die of natural causes. They were often sacrificed to accompany their master. Historians still argue whether this was voluntary honor-bound drugged or forced, you can guess. Either way, a royal burial was a group affair. It's a grim concept, softened only by how earnestly they believed in eternity. If you were someone's cook in life, you were expected to keep cooking in death. Oh, except now with magical benefits like no sore feet and unlimited cumin. And yet these early burial customs weren't entirely about pampering the dead. They were also a form of social proof. Your tomb wasn't just where your soul chilled, it was your statement piece. It told future visitors, hey, I mattered, enough to deserve this, which, let's be honest, is still how we treat a lot of graveyards. As you keep wandering through these ancient grave suburbs, you might notice something surprising. Some tombs are elaborate, others modest. Some have walls covered in hieroglyphs and spells, others just a name and a carved figure. That's because Egypt wasn't all pharaohs and priests. Regular people wanted in on this eternity gig too. But more on that in a later section, don't worry. Here what matters is this. In the grand competition between gods and ghosts, the ghosts were winning. More energy resources and artistic talent went into building tombs than temples, especially in the early dynastic periods. Death wasn't the end, it was the great beginning. And if you were smart and rich, you got a head start by building your tomb while you were still young. Fun fact, some pharaohs started tomb construction the moment they took the throne, which makes sense because if your average reign was 20 years and the tomb needed 19, well, time's ticking. You kneel and brush dust from a painted slab. The images of a man sitting before an offering table, hands outstretched, his face turned toward the viewer, like he's waiting for someone to drop off groceries. Below him are rows of tiny images, loaves, onions, cattle beer jugs. These aren't just decoration, they're instructions, visual spells to summon food forever. If you die and nobody brings your ka, a snack, you're stuck with spiritual hunger pangs for eternity. Rude. Here's your quirky bit for the night. One early tomb even includes a painting of a woman giving birth. Scholars are still scratching their heads over that one. Was it a symbol of eternal renewal, or just an artist getting wildly off script? What's certain is that these people didn't casually believe in the afterlife. They architected for it. Every angle of their cemeteries reflects purpose. Even tomb entrances pointed west to the setting sun, the doorway to the world of the dead. So if you ever wondered why the pyramids still stand, while modern condos crumble after 50 years, it's not just engineering. It's obsession. It's belief carved into limestone. And as night deepens, and the cool desert air replaces the day's furnace heat, you start to realize maybe this isn't a place of death at all. It's a city of hope. A very dusty, slightly creepy, but strangely beautiful hope. You keep walking. The sand crunches beneath your feet, soft now in the cool air like powdered bone. All around you rise the homes of the dead, some crumbling others, defiant, still bearing the marks of chisel and pigment. And as your eyes adjust, you begin to see something even stranger than the tombs themselves, the certainty, the audacity. The ancient Egyptians didn't just believe in the afterlife, they counted on it. Like the sunrise, it's not a maybe, it's a map, and everyone's expected to follow it. You, for example, have just died. Sorry. But don't worry, it's not the end. In fact, it's kind of the beginning. If you were an ancient Egyptian, you'd already be making arrangements, not just with priests and embalmers, but with your own soul. You see, dying in Egypt wasn't a sudden drop into oblivion. It was a slow process. Your body would stay here, but your soul, your spirit, your spark would keep moving. And that spark had a name Ka, or sometimes Ba, or sometimes both, plus a few others depending on which dynasty you're stuck in. But we'll get to that soul-splitting mess later. For now, you've entered the transitional zone, the liminal space between the world of the living and the blessed afterlife. It's like airport security, but with more jackal-headed judges and fewer pat-downs. This belief in a continued journey wasn't just comforting, it was woven into the fabric of society. Your family. They're already hiring professional mourners, dressing in linen, shaving their eyebrows, especially if you were a cat, weirdly. They're reciting prayers and piling food near your body. But it's not just grief, it's logistics. Your soul needs a smooth transfer. If something goes wrong, you might get stuck in the in-between, knocking on your tomb's fake door, hoping someone drops off a snack. Historians still debate how widely these beliefs extended across classes. Was eternal life only for the elite, or could farmers and brewers expect the same post-death perks? What's clear is that even the humblest graves often included little models, boats, granaries, breweries, miniature proxies for an eternal support staff. Think dollhouse, but spiritual. And it wasn't just about continuing life. It was about perfecting it. The afterlife was the field of reeds, a mirror of Egypt, but better. No floods, no taxes, just sunshine, barley, and boats. You'd farm, but in that Instagrammable way, where the wheat is always golden and nobody pulls a back muscle. You'd eat, drink, love, sing. You'd hang out with your great-great-grandparents and meet some minor deities. You wouldn't float around in clouds, you'd live. But getting there wasn't automatic. First, your Ka had to be recognized. You needed your name spoken, your image preserved. Otherwise, you risked fading out like a forgotten password. No name, no presence. That's why tombs were packed with statues' backup avatars for your soul to inhabit. If one broke, there were 27 more just like it. Redundancy not just for hard drives. And then there's your body. It needed to stay intact, not because of aesthetics, but because your soul might return to visit. If your nose was missing, that's a problem. If your body was burned, chewed, or otherwise obliterated, you might be toast, figuratively and spiritually. So your loved ones made sure your physical remains were secure, carefully wrapped, perfumed, placed with care in a coffin, sometimes nested like Russian dolls. You weren't just a corpse. You were cargo on the journey to eternity. But and here's a juicy bit, they didn't always agree on where that journey led. Some texts describe a long trek through underworld lakes and gates, battling chaos demons. Others suggest a floaty transition, where you rise like smoke to the sky and become one with the sun. Some believed you joined Osiris in the depths of the Nile. Others said you boarded Ra's celestial boat and sailed the heavens. Egyptian religion was nothing if not flexible. That's part of the charm and the confusion. scholars still wrestle with the contradictions. Was the afterlife underground in the sky, or right here in Egypt, but more sparkly? The answer seems to be yes, all of the above. Pick your favorite. What matters most is that everyone prepared. Your whole life was essentially a warm-up act. Build the tomb, fund the rituals, commission the spells, live in a way that honored the gods, be decent, generous, or at least fake it in your funeral inscriptions. Because the afterlife, it's a long gig. Oh, and remember those offerings. You didn't just need food and furniture, you needed words, magical ones, incantations, instructions. The earliest versions were carved right into the tomb walls' pyramid texts. Later, they migrated to coffins. Eventually, they became scrolls, your very own Book of the Dead, which we'll dig into soon, promise. But for now, imagine yourself drifting. Not ghost-like, but essential. You feel the tug of your ka searching for sustenance. You feel your ba restless, ready to stretch its wings and return to your body. And all around you, the desert hums with memory. Every grain of sand has seen someone buried with hope. And just when you think you're alone, you hear a voice soft and insistent, reciting your name, your child perhaps, your wife, your nephew, speaking it aloud beside your tomb because they know the rule. To speak the name of the dead is to make them live again. And for a moment, you do. You wake up cold, not from wind or weather, but from being profoundly disturbingly preserved. You can't feel your body, but you know it's there, wrapped tight, stuffed, pickled in natron salts, like an ancient deli special. Welcome to mummification, the spa treatment of the dead. It's not glamorous, it's not gentle, but if you want your soul to recognize your body later and maybe pop in for the occasional midnight visit, you need to be in good shape, or at least in A shape. So here you are, watching from somewhere above or within as a small methodical team gets to work on your freshly deceased self. It's hot, the room smells like resins and unspoken trauma, and everyone's wearing clean linen. There's chanting, there are knives, and absolutely no sense of personal privacy. Because to become eternal, you first have to be emptied, literally. First, they stick a hooked tool up your nose. And yes, it's as bad as it sounds. Your brain gone, discarded like a used loofah. The Egyptians didn't think it mattered much, just filler material. Historians still debate whether this was symbolic or just practical. Either way, it's not coming with you. Next up, your organs. They go in jars, special ones, each guarded by a tiny deity. Lungs, liver, stomach, intestines. Each gets a cozy little pot with a decorative lid. Your heart, though, that's a big deal. If you're lucky, they leave it in. You'll need it later for that feather thing. If you're unlucky, well, they might replace it with a bead or an amulet and call it a day. One mummy had a clump of linen instead. Talk about budget cuts. Now your hollowed-out body gets rinsed in wine fancy, packed in salt crunchy, and left to marinate for 40 days. 40. That's longer than some Netflix subscriptions. And all so your KA won't return to find you looking mushy. Once the moisture's out, it's wrapping time. Hundreds of meters of linen, sometimes inscribed with prayers. Fingers and toes get wrapped individually, like little burritos. Amulets are slipped in between layers, tiny spells to protect you like ancient, spiritual bubble wrap. Your face might get a golden mask if you were royalty. If not, maybe just a nicely painted coffin lid. By now, you're basically a sacred art project, a preserved husk wrapped tighter than a college student's finances. But you're ready, ready to be entombed, stored, and remembered. Still, mummification wasn't just a biological process, it was sacred theater. Every action had symbolic meaning. The high priest would don the mask of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, and perform rituals as if he was Anubis. You weren't just being embalmed, you were being transformed into something holy. And this whole spectacle wasn't limited to humans, not even close. Egyptians mummified animals too. Cats, obviously, tons of cats. Some were pets, others were temple offerings, essentially furry prayers with whiskers. They also embalmed ibises, for Thoth crocodiles for Sobek, and even scarab beetles. There's at least one mummified baboon buried with full honors, which suggests ancient Egypt may have been the birthplace of the emotional support monkey. And here's a particularly quirky twist. Sometimes they cheated. Some animal mummies were just bundles of linen with bones or nothing inside, a kind of holy placebo. Whether this was fraud or symbolic economy is still debated. Historians argue, was it a scam, a devotional shortcut, or just a temple running out of stock but back to you? You've been processed, perfumed, packed, and positioned. Now you're lowered into your tomb with care. The sarcophagus is sealed. The room goes dark. But your journey, it's just beginning. From above, or from wherever your consciousness now floats, you see the rituals continue. The opening of the mouth ceremony is performed. A priest touches your lips with special tools granting you the power to speak, eat, breathe essential afterlife activities, in case you hadn't guessed. Imagine watching your body so carefully handled while your soul lingers nearby. It's not horror, it's hope. This is a system, a process, a belief so powerful they made it a national art form. And what an art it was. Mummification evolved over centuries. Early techniques were basic, just shallow graves in the desert. Nature did the preserving. But as social status demanded flair, the process became complex. Embalmers were skilled professionals. You could even choose your package deluxe standard or budget. Some mummies are works of anatomical genius. Others look like someone fell asleep mid-rap. In one documented case, embalmers made a colossal oops. They accidentally decapitated the body and stitched the head back on, sideways. Yes, sideways. That poor soul may have spent eternity with a crick in the neck. But even imperfect mummies were treated with reverence, because to the Egyptians, the body was sacred, not just as a vessel, but as a focal point of memory. Without it, your soul might wander confused. With it, you had a chance. That's why tomb robbing was such a cosmic crime. Looters didn't just steal gold, they disrupted eternity. Desecrating a body was in effect spiritual sabotage. And sometimes, those embalmers got the last laugh. Some tombs included fake chambers, false doors, or even booby traps not to kill, but to confuse. Nothing says eternal rest like a secret hallway to nowhere. And so, as you rest in layers of linen and centuries of hope, you understand something. This was never just about death. It was about identity, continuity, memory, and a faith so deep that people spent their entire lives preparing for the moment they would stop living and start living again. You're not a corpse, you're a seed, wrapped, buried, and waiting to bloom in another world. You hover quietly now as if perched on the ceiling of your own burial chamber. You can almost hear the sandstone settle. The flickering torchlight dances across walls, thick with images. Your favorite meals, your dearest family members, even your dog who's wagging happily, because yes, he made the cut too. But over by the foot of your sarcophagus, something strange is happening. 4 squat jars are lined up in a perfect row. Each has a beautifully carved lid, shaped like a little god's head, 1 human, 1 baboon, 1 jackal, 1 falcon. If you weren't already floating as a semi-ethereal being, you might feel mildly insulted, because inside these sacred jars are your guts. Welcome to the Canopic Club, and yes, you're the main donor. Let's rewind a little. During mummification, your embalmers scooped out your internal organs, rinsed them in palm wine, like a sacrificial charcuterie, and then carefully packed them away. But they didn't just toss everything into a communal Tupperware and call it a day. No. Each organ got its own designated jar, its own magical guardian, and its own name on the VIP guest list to the afterlife. These are the canopic jars, and they are not optional. You've got 4 major players here. First up is Imseti with a human head. He's guarding your liver, presumably because it's closest to your heart, both emotionally and geographically. Next is Hapi, who despite the adorable baboon face, is all business when it comes to your lungs. Dua Mutef, the jackal-headed guardian, gets your stomach and a reputation for being very protective. Finally, Kebesenuef, bless you, watches over your intestines with his falcon face and deeply judgmental stare. Each jar is more than just an organ container. It's a symbol, a shrine, a divine insurance policy, and each one is paired with a goddess as backup. You know, in case things get out of hand and someone tries to sneak your kidneys out for resale. But here's where things get curious. Not all mummies actually have their organs. In many cases, the jars were symbolic, beautifully made, dutifully placed, and totally empty, like sacred souvenirs. Some scholars think it was a cost-cutting measure. Others suggest the embalmers were just too tired to deal with icky organ logistics. Historians still argue whether these dummy jars were a legitimate theological substitute or just an elaborate game of pretend. But you went full package. You insisted on the good stuff, so your jars sit there solemn and silent, their contents slowly drying over the centuries. But don't worry, your KA isn't planning to eat them. The point is preservation. If your soul ever needs to recognize your whole self again, everything's where it should be, except your brain, of course, which was apparently never invited to this party. And while we're on that, isn't it fascinating they threw away the brain? To the ancient Egyptians, it was just mushy filler. Meanwhile, your heart, your big red emotional compass, was everything. They believed it housed your personality, your memories, your morals. Your conscience lived in your chest, thudding away like a spiritual metronome. Which brings us back to the most important part of all this organ shuffle the heart. If you were especially unlucky or poor or embalmed by a guy named Steve, you might find yourself missing that key piece. In some cases, embalmers left it out. In others, they substituted it with a heart-shaped amulet, which was about as helpful as replacing a passport with a doodle. But assuming you did everything right, your heart would soon face the ultimate test, being weighed, not metaphorically, literally, against a feather. But we'll get to that heart-thumping drama soon. For now, you drift through the quiet tomb and realize how precise this whole system is. The canopic jars aren't just containers, they're portals. Each is marked with inscriptions, spells, prayers, little bits of magic written to ensure your organs wouldn't get lost, corrupted, or misused in the afterlife. Think of them like encrypted backups in a divine cloud storage system. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some canopic jars were crafted so beautifully they became heirlooms. One nobleman's jars were discovered reused in a totally unrelated tomb generations later. Canopic recycling. A little morbid, sure, but efficient. Others were so poorly labeled that archaeologists today still argue over which jar belonged to which organ. In one set, the baboon-headed jar contained nothing. The liver was where the intestines should be. Someone clearly skipped anatomy day at embalming school. And yet for all this messiness, the intention was pure. Preserve, protect, prepare. You lean closer to the jars. The hieroglyphs shimmer faintly in the light, like they're still working, still holding the boundary between this world and the next. A line of text wraps around the rim like a charm bracelet calling out to the gods for safe passage. Your organs may be separate, but your being is whole. In the Egyptian view of self, you weren't just a body. You were a collection of forces, physical and spiritual. Kaba Achren Shiut, it's body, soul, spirit, name, shadow. Each part had needs, each part had destinations, and every bit of you had to be accounted for. That's why you had statues of yourself, paintings of yourself, even songs about yourself carved on stone. So the canopic jars were just one piece of the puzzle, but they were essential. They meant you had planned, that someone cared enough to keep your stomach safe under the protection of a jackal with eyeliner. And centuries later, someone, maybe a dusty archaeologist, maybe a sleepy traveler like you, would uncover them and whisper they believed. And maybe you'll whisper back. You pose near the far wall of your tomb. The air is still thick with the scent of old resin and stone, but your attention is pulled upward to a painting of a strange bird with a human head. It floats above a sleeping figure. The face on the bird, it's yours. Congratulations, that's your Be. And no, it's not a typo. The ancient Egyptians didn't think of the soul as one neat, invisible package. Oh no, you were a collection of moving parts, some flying, some sipping beer in the tomb, others working a second job in the spirit realm. You weren't a ghost, you were a soul ecosystem. Let's break it down gently since you've already been embalmed once this evening. First, the K. That's the part of you that drinks, eats, and parties in the afterlife. It's like your spiritual stomach, and it's picky. It needs actual offerings, bread, beer, roasted meats, not just spiritual vibes. If your family slacks off on their tomb duties, your KA might start sulking, or worse, wandering. Then there's the Ba, your personality, your spark. It's independent, mobile. It's the part that flies out of your tomb in bird form, visits your old neighborhood, checks in on your cat, who is also probably embalmed and holding court somewhere. Every night, your Ba comes back to rest with your mummy, kind of like your soul commuting between dimensions. Historians still argue whether the BA is more like a soul or a conscience, but they all agree it wears your face and it flaps. Next up is the Ak, the most mysterious soul fragment of all. It's your transfigured spirit, the version of you that becomes luminous and eternal. Think of it like your final evolution. The Akoj doesn't need food or spells, it just is. But to get there, you have to pass a few cosmic checkpoints. Spoiler, not everyone makes it, so also tagging along is your Ren or name. This isn't just a label, it's your essence. If your name is erased, you're toast. That's why pharaohs had their names plastered all over Egypt. They weren't just bragging, they were future-proofing their souls. A name spoken is a soul remembered. That's why tombs say my name, and I shall live. Beyoncé didn't invent that line. The Egyptians did. And don't forget your shadow, not metaphorical, literal. Your shadow was thought to be a part of you, like a spiritual fingerprint. It followed you around in life, and if treated properly, continued to exist in death. Tombs often include tiny shadow guardians, carved into walls, insurance in case your own shed got shy. So there you are, Kaba Ach Renshut. Some hungry, some emotional, all essential. Imagine trying to manage that many identities now. You'd need an app. In life, rituals helped keep those parts connected. In death, it was all about preparation. Your tomb was designed to be a soul docking station. Food and drink for the Ka, paintings and names for the Ren, statues and spells to guide the Ba home each night. The goal wasn't just to rest, it was to function. And function you did. Your Ba, painted with care and stylized wings, flutters out at dawn. It drifts across fields of barley peers, into temple courtyards, maybe sneaks into the marketplace for nostalgia. It smells dates and dust and the smoke of incense. It sees someone call your name near your tomb door, and it feels it. That subtle tug of memory pulling it home. At dusk, it returns to you, back to the chamber, back to your linen-wrapped form. The cycle begins again, but it's not just mechanics, it's meaning. You're not fragmented, you're flexible. Each part of you serves a purpose, a role, in maintaining your presence across dimensions. It's a soul system with fail-safes. Here's your quirky fringe detail of the night in some later periods. Priests would recite daily spells to call the Be'e back into the tomb, especially if the family was concerned it might be distracted. Kind of like shouting dinner's ready to your astral self. It wasn't just belief, it was duty. Tomb architecture reflects this. False doors allowed the BA to pass. Painted eyes on coffins let the Ka see offerings. Walls were covered in instructions. Every line of hieroglyphic text was a roadmap for these soul fragments to navigate back to their body or forward into the field of reeds. But not everyone agreed on the details. Some texts say the Be'e and Kai merged into the Ak after death, becoming a single eternal being. Others describe them continuing separately forever, visiting the living in dreams, or haunting careless tomb robbers. Historians still debate how literally Egyptians took these distinctions. Were they poetic metaphors, or did every priest genuinely believe your Be'e might get stuck in traffic and miss its nightly return? What's clear is the Egyptians knew themselves to be complex, multi-layered, not just flesh and bone, but name, shadow, will memory magic. And they respected that complexity, planned for it, honored it, built temples of stone and time around it. And maybe, so should we. So as your Ba wings its way back through the star-swept twilight, past the pylons of forgotten temples, and the rustling reeds along the Nile, you begin to understand. Death wasn't an ending, it was expansion. You weren't losing yourself, you were unfolding. Somewhere deep in the night, as your ba drifts over the Nile and your ka lounges beside your favorite clay beer jug, something shifts. The tomb grows stiller, the air thicker, and the shadows around your coffin stretch just a little longer than they should. Because now the real journey begins. You've got your body preserved, your soul fragments properly documented, your jars of guts alphabetized and sealed, but without one very specific thing, you're not going anywhere. You need instructions, and not the casual kind like turn left at the giant jackal statue. We're talking detailed, spell for every scenario, GPS for the dead kind of help. You, dear traveler, need a copy of the Book of the Dead, which is not, in case you're wondering, a book about how to die. It's a guide on how to survive after you've died. And let's be clear, it's not even a book the way you know it. There's no hardcover, no glossy pages. What you get is a papyrus scroll, sometimes meters long, covered in hieroglyphs, and packed with enough magical content to make Hogwarts blush. You don't read it cover to cover. You live it, or rather, unlive it. The original name, The Book of Coming Forth by Day. Catchy, right? It sounds almost cheerful. That's because the goal isn't just to reach the afterlife. It's to walk in the sun again, to rise daily just like Ra, the sun god, who makes the round trip from underworld to daylight every single day. If he can do it, so can you, assuming you have the right spells. Inside this scroll, you'll find an eclectic mix of instructions, incantations, hymns, and emergency exit plans. Need to know how to avoid decapitation by underworld demons covered. Want to make sure your heart doesn't tattle on you during judgment? There's a spell for that. Concerned about being turned upside down by a crocodile-headed door guardian. Page 12, probably. Each spell begins the same way to be spoken by the Osiris. Insert your name here. Because once you die, you become an Osiris, the god of resurrection. You're not just a soul, you're a symbol, a myth in motion. But wait, how do you even get a Book of the Dead? You don't just pick one up at the afterlife checkout counter. No, you commission it. If you were wealthy, you'd hire a scribe to personalize a scroll just for you. Your name inserted into the spells, your desired afterlife address scribbled in the margins. If you were less wealthy, you might purchase a pre-written version and hope no one noticed you borrowed someone else's AKH insurance. Spoiler, they noticed. Some scrolls are breathtaking, decorated with vivid illustrations, filled with tiny boats, winged deities, and beautiful blue-black ink. Others are a little rushed. Some have spelling errors. One notable scroll reversed the direction of the underworld. Another accidentally called the deceased beloved wife instead of beloved husband. Scribes, after all, were only human. Sleepy, overworked, occasionally illiterate humans. Historians still argue whether every Egyptian had access to a Book of the Dead, or if it was mostly an upper-class privilege. What's certain is this even a single spell could make a difference. Families would sometimes inscribe key ones directly onto coffins, sarcophagi, or tomb walls, like ancient cheat codes etched in stone. And what kind of spells are we talking about? Well, for starters, there's spell 125, the big one, the weighing of the heart ceremony. You'll face it soon, but for now, just know it's the spiritual equivalent of a job interview crossed with a polygraph test. More on that horror show later. There's also spell 30B, which pleads with your heart. Do not stand as a witness against me. Basically, you're telling your own chest organ to zip it and play along. It's touching and mildly desperate. Other spells protect you from snakes, crocodiles, hostile baboons. Yes, apparently that was a problem. Upside down, walking bad breath, decapitation, incorrect name pronunciation, and being forced to eat your own feces. That last one is not a joke. The underworld is weird. Some spells let you transform into a swallow, a lotus flower, a divine goose, a heron, a soul pizza. Okay, not that last one, but close. The point is shape-shifting wasn't fantasy. It was strategy. And then there are the gates. The book describes a long, grueling journey through 12 gates of the underworld, each guarded by beings with names like He Who Lives on Snakes and She Who Dances in Blood. You'll need passwords, postures, and polite greetings. This isn't a casual stroll. It's a bureaucratic nightmare. The DMV, but with jackals. Fortunately, your book has all the cheat codes. Say the right thing, present the right amulet. Keep your name intact and you'll get through. Mess up. You risk having your soul swatted by a cosmic bug zapper. One fringe theory suggests some Egyptians memorized key parts of the book. Not just priests, but regular folks repeating spells in life, so they'd be fluent in death. It's like learning Spanish on Duolingo for the afterlife. What's amazing is how personal these scrolls were. Each tells a story not just of religion, but of love, fear, identity. A farmer might ask to see his fields again, a mother to hold her child, a scribe to continue writing poems in the breeze, and you just want to make it to the other side with your dignity, your heart, and maybe a snack. So as your ba returns to its sleeping mummy self, the scroll nearby flickers faintly in the torchlight. Ink on papyrus, spelling out your fate, your map, your lifeline, because when everything else is stripped away, your wealth, your body, your worldly titles, what's left is this: your name, your story, your journey. Written, spoken, remembered. You're standing now not quite in your body, but tethered to it. You can feel the linen pulling tight across your chest, the silence pressing like velvet on every surface of your tomb. Time doesn't tick here. It breathes, slowly, eternally. But then, a shift, a flicker. A door that wasn't a door opens with no sound. You're being summoned. It's time for the judgment. You glide weightless, bodiless, through a corridor of stars, through ink-dark caverns, and lily-bright hallways where jackal-headed guides nod without smiling. No one speaks, but everyone knows. The moment has arrived. Your whole life is about to be evaluated, and the test, it's terrifyingly simple. Your heart will be weighed, not your mind, not your accomplishments, not your workout routine, your heart. It has been carefully preserved in your chest, or perhaps held in your hand as you enter the Hall of Maat. The place feels larger than a pyramid, but lit like a candlelit chapel. On one side, the gods, dozens of them. Animal heads, human bodies, eyes that never blink. On the other, a giant golden scale. On one plate, your heart, the real thing thudding softly like it's still alive. On the other plate, a feather, but not just any feather. This is the feather of Maat, goddess of truth, balance, cosmic order, and excellent eyeliner. She's here too, standing silently, arms crossed, watching you like a teacher on exam day. This is no metaphor. In Egyptian belief, the heart was the seat of the soul. Not just feelings, but memory morality who you were. If your heart was lighter than the feather you passed, congrats. You earned eternal life full of sunshine music and uninterrupted naps. But if your heart was heavy-weighted with guilt, lies unspoken regrets, you failed. And failure is not great. You don't go to hell. There's no fiery lake or horned demon. No, the Egyptians hid something worse. You get eaten. Standing beside the scale is a creature named Ammit, the devourer of the dead. She's part lion, part hippo, part crocodile. Basically, a nightmare built from the most bitey parts of the animal kingdom. And she's hungry. Should your heart outweigh the feather, she'll lunge forward and chomp. No ceremony, no warnings. One gulp and poof, your soul is gone. Not punished, just erased, forgotten. Eternal non-existence. Historians still debate whether this annihilation was symbolic or literal. Did people really believe they'd be unmade, or was it a poetic warning to live better? No one knows for sure. But judging by the care Egyptians took to avoid this fate, they believed it enough. Back to you. You stand motionless. A priestly figure Anubis with his jackal head and cool detachment adjusts the scale. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, holds a reed pen and papyrus scroll ready to record the outcome like a divine court stenographer. Your heart trembles. The feather floats impossibly still. The scale dips, and you wait. But here's the thing, this moment, you've been preparing for it since your first day alive. Every offering, every prayer, every time you corrected the market weights, instead of cheating the merchant, this is when it counts. And just to be safe, you memorized spell 30B from your Book of the Dead, whispering it over and over like a mantra. Oh, my heart, do not rise up against me as a witness. A little emotional bribery never hurts. Your quirky tidbit tonight in one famous tomb, the heart scarab amulet placed on the mummy, was so big it looked like a beetle wearing a dinner plate. Scholars think it may have been chosen to weigh down the heart, tricking the scale into tipping toward innocence. Eternal life brought to you by ancient hackery, and then balance. The scales even out. Your heart flutters, but does not fall. The feather glows faintly, and Ammit, disappointed, slinks back into the shadows. She's got nothing to chew tonight. You passed. No applause, no balloons, just the quiet nod of Ma'at the Scratch, of Thoth's pen, and the weightless relief of having your soul affirmed. You are justified. That's the word the Egyptians used, Ma'heru. It means true of voice. It means your name will be spoken, your soul will be honored, your journey will continue. And here's the beautiful part. This judgment isn't about divine wrath. It's about cosmic balance, about harmony. The Egyptians weren't obsessed with punishment. They were obsessed with order, with fitting into the eternal rhythm of the universe, like a single note in a grand song. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest. And now, because you are the gods, welcome you. Osiris steps forward, green-skinned, wrapped in linen crown, tall and regal. He gestures gently. You follow him past the scale, through a second set of doors, into something new. Warmth, light, the sound of wind rustling reeds. You're not a mummy anymore, not a soul fragment trying to find its pieces. You are whole. You are Ak, transformed, transfigured, free. But even now you glance back at your heart, your feather, your name on Thoth's scroll. You passed, and that's everything. The doors to the Hall of Ma'at seal behind you with a hush, no clatter, no finality. Just a soft close-in like a curtain falling after the quietest performance of your life. Or rather, your death. And now you step into something different. Not heaven, not paradise, not yet. It's the afterlife bureaucracy. You thought passing the judgment would be the end, didn't you? That you'd be instantly lounging in a celestial recliner with bottomless beer and a harpist named Ankasanaman feeding you grapes. Oh no, this is ancient Egypt. Even in death, there's paperwork. You've entered a realm that's oddly familiar. Not because it looks like Earth, it doesn't, but because it functions like your local government office. Only here, instead of clerks and supervisors, you've got gods, lots of them, and they all have roles, strict ones. Standing beside you is Thoth again, scribe of the gods, master of accounting, inventor of writing, and possibly the first divine civil servant in history. He has your test results. You passed. But now he must log your name in the eternal ledger and submit you to post-death processing. You glance around. The room or space or astral DMV buzzes with quiet activity. Deities in every direction, each overseeing one piece of the great machine that runs the universe. This isn't chaos, it's cosmic administration. You see Osiris, ruler of the afterlife, seated on a throne, flanked by his sisters, Isis and Nephthys, who whisper spells of protection into the air like a scented mist. Osiris gives you that solemn nod only someone who's been murdered, dismembered, resurrected, and crowned king can truly master. You nod back respectfully. This guy's been through stuff. To the side, Anubis, jackal-headed god of embalming and guide of souls, reviews your embalming file. He sniffs the air because, well, jackal, and seems pleased. No maggots, no budget wrappings. You're cleared for spiritual transit. But wait before you're fully admitted into the field of reeds. There's more processing to endure, more deities to charm. You have to reaffirm your innocence. Again, enter the 42 judges. Yes, 42. Not gods exactly, but divine functionaries, each responsible for one moral category. Think of them as the heavenly equivalent of ethics review panels. You must declare your innocence before each one in what's known as the negative confession. You begin, I have not stolen, I have not killed, I have not made others weep, I have not eaten my heart. Yes, that's one of them. Apparently, it was a problem. Each statement is directed at a specific judge whose names range from the fearsome to the oddly adorable, he who lives on Mott, she who dances in fire, and our favorite, he who comes without being seen, which frankly sounds like the world's most passive-aggressive house guest. Historians still debate whether these declarations were meant to be literal oaths or aspirational affirmations. Did anyone truly live a life that clean? Or was it more about declaring intention, alignment with cosmic truth? Regardless, you nail it. The judges blink nod and mark your soul ethically aligned. You're almost through, but just in case the gods have one last trick to keep you from slacking off. A tiny figure is placed into your tomb. You may have seen it before, just a few inches tall, often blue-green, shaped like a tiny person with crossed arms. That my friend is a Shabti. Shabtis are afterlife assistants, tiny statues that magically come to life when you're summoned to do work. That's right, even in paradise there's chores, plowing, harvesting, irrigation. The field of reeds doesn't run itself. So when the gods say, Hey, it's your turn to dig the Shabti, answers. Present some tombs had hundreds of these figurines, one for every day of the year, plus supervisors. Think of it as the original workforce automation. Quirky detail of the night. Some people feared the Shabtis wouldn't be motivated enough, so they inscribed whips on their tiny hands. Eternal micromanagement. It's comforting in a deeply unnerving way. Finally, after all this, you're led forward. Thoth stamps something invisible on your soul. Anubis nods. Osiris stands. The divine bureaucracy has declared you fit for eternity. You pass through a final gate, no grand fanfare, just the rustling of reeds and a breeze like warm breath. You've made it, and what greets you isn't gold or marble, it's familiar. Fields of barley ripple like water. The Nile stretches shimmering. Papyrus boats drift lazily. You see homes like the ones you knew, only cleaner, brighter, and without noisy neighbors or bad plumbing. In the distance, musicians play. Families laugh. Someone's cat leaps effortlessly onto a rooftop and yawns. This is the field of reeds, Egypt's eternal paradise. A mirror of earth, but perfect. You'll have food, love, laughter, labor, but fulfilling and rest. You're free from sickness, from death, from fear. You're alive again, but better. And yes, you'll still have responsibilities. You'll visit the temples of the gods. You'll offer prayers. You'll plow spiritual fields, but only if you want to, and only with the help of your trusty Shabtis. What makes this afterlife unique isn't the comfort, it's the continuity. The Egyptians didn't dream of floating on clouds or strumming harps. They dreamed of life as it should have been, peaceful, joyful, ordered. They didn't want escape. They wanted completion. And you've earned it. You glance behind you. The judgment chamber, the weighing, the scale, Amit's shadow fading. You're not just dead, you're fulfilled. You take your first steps through the field of reeds, and the ground is soft, springy, impossibly green. The air smells like sunlight filtered through palm leaves, with a faint hint of fresh bread rising from some divine bakery nearby. This isn't a misty paradise of dreams, it's real, tangible, dust-free, bug-free, perfectly temperate. Welcome to your new forever. But before you start picking out eternal curtains for your heavenly mud brick house, there's something important to notice. You are not alone, because here in the afterlife, you're not just a free-floating spirit, you're part of a community. And just like in life, communities run on the basics: food, shelter, friends, and yep, snacks. It turns out even immortal souls need dinner plans. Ancient Egyptians were absolutely obsessed with ensuring they could eat, drink, and entertain themselves in the afterlife. You'd think passing through cosmic judgment and being declared true of voice might release you from earthly cravings, but nope. The Ka, the part of your soul responsible for energy and appetite, still expects to be fed. So back in the tomb, your loved ones stocked up. They didn't just leave a few symbolic apples or a dusty bag of grain. They went all out. Loaves of bread, cuts of meat, baskets of figs, and dates, jars of honey, even kegs of beer. Because eternity is a long time, and no one wants to go through it hangry. These weren't just offerings for the gods. They were for you, to nourish your Ka, to keep your spirit strong. And since you can't physically chew anymore, the idea was that your soul would absorb the essence of the food, which sounds nice and low calorie, and it wasn't just food. People included board games, musical instruments, cosmetics, combs, even weapons, all for your use in the next world. The afterlife wasn't seen as a place of stillness, it was a fully functioning Egypt 2.0, and you were going to live in it, shop in it, and dance in it. This obsession with afterlife comforts reached its peak in the tombs of the elite. Go peek inside any well-preserved tomb, pharaohs, high priests, wealthy scribes, and you'll find tomb art menus painted in loving detail. A painting of a roast duck wasn't just a decoration. It was a magical spell that allowed the duck to appear fully cooked and beautifully plated for your K to enjoy. You've got lists of offerings carved into stone, 1,000 jugs of beer, 1,000 loaves of bread, 1,000 oxen, 1,000 ducks, 1,000, basically everything. Even your afterlife catering service had bulk options. One quirky detail you'll love. Sometimes the painted food was actually labeled as for eternity, as if someone was just a little paranoid that the roast goose might expire after a few centuries. Nothing says divine cuisine like a spiritual expiration date, and this was more than just hoarding. The Egyptians weren't trying to impress anyone. They truly believed your afterlife quality depended on preparation. If you didn't bring food, or at least paint it on the walls, you risked starving in the afterlife, and not metaphorically, spiritually, hungrily starving. Poorer folks, of course, couldn't afford 1,000-loaf spells, but even they included a token loaf or two, maybe a clay pot of beer, or a carved duck figurine. Some got creative substituting cheap mud models for expensive goods, afterlife minimalism, if you will, and in case your real-life family forgot to keep the offerings coming, backup plans were built into the tomb. Texts like the offering formula would magically summon food on command. Just reading the spell out loud was enough to conjure up a steaming platter of spiritual stew. If your descendants remembered to stop by and speak your name along with the formula, you were golden. If they didn't, well, let's just say the afterlife might get a little peckish. That's why tomb maintenance was serious business. Entire professions existed for tending tombs priests who were paid to regularly visit, sweep the floors, light incense, and deliver offerings. They didn't work for free, though. Wealthy Egyptians created endowments, basically ancient trust funds, to pay the priests with land or grain. Eternal catering services on retainer. But what if you didn't trust your family to keep things going? Enter statues. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of statues were buried with the dead, each inscribed with your name and variations of the offering spell. The idea, even if your name wasn't spoken, the statue itself would recite it, like spiritual voicemail. Hi, you've reached the afterlife. Please leave roast duck at the beep. This way, your name echoed through eternity, ensuring your K would always have a full plate, even if your descendants had moved on or forgotten how to pronounce Kener Kepchef. And beyond the food, oh the luxury. Wall scenes show people lounging on fancy couches, holding lotuses, drinking beer poured by attractive attendants. There are musical troupes, dancers, banquets, family reunions. Think of it as a dream dinner party where nobody gets tired or tipsy unless you want to. Historians still debate whether these were literal expectations or symbolic ideals. Did Egyptians truly believe you'd be nibbling spiritual figs forever, or was it a metaphor for divine satisfaction? Honestly, it was probably both. To them, the physical and spiritual were never far apart. If you enjoyed something in life, it made sense to bring it with you. Why give up your pleasures when you could just continue? And now here you are, sitting cross-legged on a reed mat beneath a fig tree, a soft breeze ruffling your linen. A jug of beer sits beside you, cool and eternal. The air smells like spices and river mud. Someone you loved in life joins you, their beige, shimmering like heat, on stone. You clink cups. No words are needed. You're fed. You're whole. You're home. You lean back full from a meal that didn't technically exist, but somehow satisfied your K more than any feast in the living world. The barley field sways around you. The afterlife is, you admit, comfortable, surprisingly so. But something looms in the distance, rising above the soft gold of the horizon. A triangle. No, the triangle. You turn your gaze to the most recognizable silhouette in all of history, the pyramid. And not just one, a whole complex of them, step pyramids bent, pyramids gleaming white limestone pyramids, shining so brightly they practically hum in the sunlight. And at their feet, mortuary temples, causeways, boat pits, and tombs that stretch for miles. You've made it to the OG skyscrapers, the monumental pyramid schemes of ancient Egypt. Let's start simple. Why the obsession with pyramids? Because pyramids weren't just fancy tombs, they were death launch pads. Immense structures built not just to hold a king's body, but to catapult his soul into eternity. The shape itself, rising up from the earth to a pointed tip, was symbolic. It mirrored the Benben, the sacred mound that emerged from the chaos of primordial waters at the dawn of creation. The pyramid was a resurrection beacon, and it worked. At least that's what pharaohs believed. Step inside the pyramid texts, some of the oldest religious writings known to humankind, and you'll see this is no ordinary grave. It's a stairway to the stars, literally. Spells etched on the stone walls inside pyramids talk of the pharaoh transforming into a star, ascending to the heavens to join Ra on his daily solar cruise. And because we're telling it like it is, these things were massive. The Great Pyramid of Giza, 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing up to 15 tons, built before iron tools, no cranes, no forklifts, just ropes, sweat clever engineering, and a very motivated labor force. Here's your quirky fact for the night. Despite popular belief, the pyramid builders weren't slaves. Nope. They were paid workers, stonemasons, bakers, brewers, engineers, who rotated through on-state service, often honored for their work. They lived in a workers' village near the pyramids, ate surprisingly well, lots of bread and beer, and even had access to medical care. Union vibes, honestly. Still, it took decades to complete just one. Pharaohs started construction as soon as they took the throne. You had to race the clock because no pyramid, no afterlife. No afterlife, well, you remember Ammit, and don't think it was just the body that mattered. The orientation had to be precise. The Great Pyramid is aligned with incredible accuracy to the cardinal points, north, southeast, and west. Some scholars believe it lines up with the stars in Orion's belt, which the Egyptians associated with Osiris, lord of the underworld. Others argue it was a solar alignment. Historians still debate whether this was intentional astronomical brilliance or the world's most miraculous accident. But the point remained, your tomb wasn't just a container. It was a cosmic machine. Everything inside mattered too. Passageways mimicked the journey of the sun through the underworld. Shafts pointed toward celestial bodies. Secret rooms, some still undiscovered, were designed for rituals, offerings, or maybe just misdirection for tomb robbers. Spoiler, it didn't work. Most pyramids were looted within a few generations. Still, pharaohs tried. They layered traps, false doors, cursed inscriptions. Some even hid their burial chambers underground, away from the obvious center. But no amount of limestone could keep out a determined thief with a crowbar and a shortage of morals. So eventually, the kings gave up on big, obvious triangles. The era of pyramids faded, replaced by rock-cut tombs hidden in the Valley of the Kings. But the obsession with an eternal home never went away. The goal remained: protect the body, preserve the soul, point it toward the stars. And what about the pyramid shape itself? It stuck around. Even after the end of the Pyramid Age, miniature versions of pyramids appeared atop tombs and amulets and in art. The geometry had meaning. It wasn't just about grandeur, it was about stability. The Egyptians saw the pyramid as a symbol of order, balance, and eternity. You may have noticed by now that the Egyptians weren't especially casual about death. They didn't wing it. They didn't wait until their golden years to plan. Pharaohs mapped their tombs while still in diapers, metaphorically. Nobles saved up their whole lives to carve a modest chamber into the cliffside. Even middle-class merchants commissioned little pyramidal stelae just to ride the tailwinds of royal glory. You standing now in the golden light of afterlife afternoon, look up at the towering face of Khufu's pyramid. It once gleamed with polished Tura limestone so bright, it reflected the sun like a beacon. Some say you could see it from miles away, shining like a second sun on Earth. And that's not just poetic. The pyramid was meant to glow, to remind the living that death wasn't darkness, it was light, return, becoming. And here's a bit of fringe fun. There's a theory that pyramids weren't just tombs, but energy collectors, cosmic batteries of some kind. While mainstream archaeologists raise their eyebrows at that, you can't help but feel something as you stand near it. A hum, a pull, or maybe it's just the wind. Still, you step closer, hand brushing the stone. You imagine the workers who dragged this block into place, the scribes who whispered spells as the capstone was set, the priests who lit incense and sang of your name. Because this pyramid, it isn't just a monument, it's a promise that you were here, that you mattered, that your soul rises with the sun. And it does. You stand in the pyramid's shadow, quiet and impossibly still. The stones beneath your feet have been warmed by 1,000 suns. Somewhere far below, inside tombs, sealed for centuries, kings and queens lie wrapped in gold and linen, waiting for no one. And as you step back into your own tomb, yes, yours, you realize something's been tucked between those soft folds of cloth hidden beneath your ribs, pressed close to your perfectly mummified skin. A charm. No dozens of them, tiny glinting clenched in the folds of your afterlife burrito wrap like magical sequins. Some no bigger than a fingernail, some shaped like beetles, ankhs, cobras, thus eyes, feathers. Welcome to the sparkling world of amulets, the ancient Egyptian equivalent of death insurance, only shinier. And yes, they were obsessed. These weren't just pretty accessories. Every amulet had a job: protection, guidance, healing, transformation, cosmic Wi-Fi, you name it, there was a charm for it. You didn't just wear jewelry because it looked good. You wore it because it might stop a demon from unzipping your soul like a travel bag. Let's start with the heart scarab. This chunky beetle amulet wasn't cute. It was crucial, usually made of green stone and inscribed with spell 30B from the Book of the Dead. It served a very specific function: convince your heart to keep quiet during judgment. Remember how your heart gets weighed against the feather of Maat well, in case it's tempted to spill your secrets. He totally cheated on his barley rations. This amulet steps in like a cosmic PR agent. Then there's the Eye of Horus or Wedjet. This one's iconic. Even today people wear it without knowing it. Once helped seal wounds, cure curses, and block bad dreams. Ancient embalmers often placed it over the incision made during mummification, because nothing says so healing like slapping a sacred eyeball on an open cavity. Another favorite, the Jed pillar symbol of stability and the backbone of the god Osiris. Often tucked near the spine during burial, it was like a cosmic chiropractic adjustment, ensuring your axe stood tall in the afterlife. Oh, and don't forget the Ankh. You've seen it, that looped cross carried by gods, like a divine handbag. It meant life, eternal life. Ankh amulets were the spiritual equivalent of carrying around a power bank for your soul. Plug in power, up resurrect. Simple. There were dozens more. The Tayet knot, also called the knot of Isis, for protection. The Uraeus cobra, to spit fire at enemies. The Ba-bird, to help your personality fly home each night. Even tiny sandals, so your soul wouldn't go barefoot across hot underworld sand. Practical and magical. Each amulet had to be made with the right material shape and timing. Some were carved from carnelian turquoise gold, or faience, a magical ceramic that shimmered blue-green like the Nile itself. Placement mattered too. One near the throat, one on the chest, one in each palm. Think of it as an astral dress code. Quirky detail for you embalmers even wrapped individual fingers and toes with their own amulets. Why? Because souls were believed to be extremely detail-oriented. If you lost a toe, your balance in the afterlife might be off. An eternity is a long time to walk funny. And who made these magical trinkets? Not jewelers, priest craftsmen, specialists who knew the correct incantations, the sacred recipes, the astronomical timing. You didn't just melt some gold and call it good. You chanted over the mold. You selected stones by lunar phase. You said prayers while the glaze dried. These weren't accessories. They were contracts. Some families spent fortunes on amulets. Others made do with painted clay or reused charms from deceased relatives. Yes, afterlife hand-me-downs were a thing. And while the elite might be buried with hundreds, even modest tombs had something, because no one wanted to arrive at the gates of eternity underdressed. Now here's a twist. Some amulets weren't hidden inside the wrappings. They were worn in life too. Amulets were like spiritual multi-tools. In battle, wear a falcon-headed charm for divine speed. Pregnant knot of Isis stat. Bad dreams, Eye of Horus under the pillow, feeling gassy. Okay, maybe not that one, but you get the point. And what's fascinating is how the tradition evolved. In the Old Kingdom, there were just a few standard charms. By the New Kingdom, hundreds. They got creative. There's even an amulet shaped like a bed, because who wants to spend the afterlife standing? Historians still debate how many of these amulets were understood by the average Egyptian. Did everyone know the difference between a Tayet knot and a Jed pillar, or were they simply following the priest's advice? Trust me, you need this one. Either way, people believed. Enough to place charms in every fold of their dead to recite incantations over shiny stones, to smuggle eternity into the tomb one trinket at a time. And now you feel them still warm against your mummified chest. They vibrate faintly, as if whispering in a language only the dead can hear. Not words exactly, but assurances. You are safe, you are protected, you are remembered. And that's the real magic. You're still lying there a few thousand years past your expiration date, bundled tight like a divine burrito and glittering underneath your wrappings with dozens of protective amulets. You've survived judgment. Your soul fragments are doing their celestial routines, your pantries stocked with magical ducks and everlasting beer. And now comes the funeral. If you think funerals today can be a little dramatic, you haven't seen one ancient Egyptian style. These weren't somber affairs with a tasteful slideshow and a guy in a tie. These were ritual performances, a mix of theater, religion, parade, and just a dash of weird. Let's walk through yours, shall we? First, the processional. Your mummified body is transported from the house to the tomb, but not in silence. There's a full-on parade, priests in white linen, family members wailing and throwing dust on themselves, musicians, standard bearers, sometimes professional mourners, yes, actual hired grief actors who scream your name, beat their chests, and roll dramatically on the ground like ancient Oscar nominees. And if your family was wealthy, add dancers, acrobats, maybe even a troupe of dwarfs believed to be magical and sacred, and animals because no respectable funeral was complete without a well-behaved sacred cow or two. At the front of this dusty conga line, your coffin elaborately painted inlaid with gold, if you were lucky, and possibly shaped like Osiris himself. The coffin often included a false face, meant to represent your ideal divine self. No offense to your real face, of course, the destination your tomb. But before you're sealed inside, we have to perform the most important ceremony of the entire event, the opening of the mouth. Now, before your BA spirals out, thinking this is some unholy dental procedure, it's symbolic. Performed by a priest dressed as your eldest son, or actually your eldest son. If he wasn't out buying fake shabties, the ritual involved touching special tools, usually shaped like adzes, to your mummy's mouth, eyes, ears, and nose. The purpose to restore your senses. See, the Egyptians believed that even in death you needed to be able to breathe, see, speak, hear, and importantly eat. Without this ritual, your K would basically be a mute statue in the afterlife, forced to mime hunger and irritation until the end of time. There were chants, gestures, movements, offerings, incense. A cow's foreleg was waved over your mouth. Don't ask, it was sacred. The idea was that you, the deceased, were being revivified, reborn, made functional again. You were no longer just a mummy. You were a spirit, with agency, with a voice. And just to be safe, they might perform the ritual on a statue of you too, in case your mummy had a scheduling conflict in the afterlife. After that, the offerings begin. You're placed in your tomb, surrounded by goods, furniture, cosmetics, linen, tools, weapons, figurines, food stacked like a marketplace at closing time. On the walls, scenes of you farming, fishing, feasting, basically flexing how awesome your afterlife was about to be. If you were royalty or high status, even boats might be buried with you. Full-size wooden ships, just in case you wanted to cruise the celestial Nile, and then everyone cries some more, or pretends to, It's hard to say. Some of those professional mourners had a flair for melodrama. One papyrus describes a mourner throwing herself into the Nile out of grief, only to climb back out 2 minutes later for a snack. You, of course, are unaware. Your consciousness is off floating among the stars, probably sipping symbolic wine and debating with Thoth about the proper use of semicolons in hieroglyphs. But back at your tomb, the final rites are being performed. Incense wafts in every direction. Libations, milk, water, beer, wine are poured on the ground. Prayers are whispered, spells recited. In some cases, they seal the tomb with curses, not to hurt the living, but to protect the dead. Warnings to any would-be tomb robbers disturb this grave, and the gods will strike you down, or at least give you a rash. Historians still argue whether these curses were literal threats or just ancient scare tactics. Spoiler, they worked better than modern alarm systems for about 200 years. Finally, the tomb is sealed. A slab slides into place. The outside world fades. Inside you, your name, your face, your spells, your offerings, your carefully selected amulets, and backup statues. You're fully equipped. You're ready. But here's a quirk for you. This whole ceremony wasn't about honoring the dead. It was about ensuring the dead could function. Every step was aimed at jump-starting your spiritual systems, like charging up a battery before launch. In fact, some of the earliest funerary texts suggest that the dead weren't truly alive in the afterlife until after their funerals, which, let's be honest, would explain the elaborate process. Now, as the last flickers of torchlight vanish behind the sealed stone, something settles inside you. Not fear, not longing, just peace. Your voice has been restored, your senses reawakened, your identity preserved, your soul fragments linked and ready, and above ground life goes on. Your family returns home, cleans up, maybe sneaks a leftover offering cake, but your name echoes in their prayers, and your image glows in the flickering oil lamps they light on feast days. Because here in Egypt, the dead don't disappear. They transition. They attend meals. They whisper in dreams. They sail by in the dark corners of the night sky, shimmering faintly. You are one of them now, fully awakened, fully honored, fully remembered. You lie in your tomb, still wrapped, protected, and sealed away, but don't get too cozy. There's movement in the air, a faint stirring. Not yours, not from your ka or ba either. Something skitters softly across the smooth stone. Tiny claws, a low hiss, and a flash of green eyes in the dark. Yes, that's a cat, but not just any cat. This feline strutting gracefully across your tomb floor may very well be sacred, revered, possibly mummified itself. Because in ancient Egypt, animals didn't just live alongside humans, they joined them in the afterlife. They were companions, symbols, guardians, and sometimes even gods in disguise. It's true, the ancient Egyptians loved animals with a kind of reverence that borders on obsession. And it wasn't limited to cats, though, let's be honest. Cats had a serious PR advantage. Let's start with them. Cats, or MIU, were everywhere. In homes, in temples, on lapis-inlaid sarcophagi, on amulets painted on walls, even in eyeliner palettes. Why? Because cats weren't just cute, they were divine, associated with the goddess Bastet, who embodied protection, fertility, and the home cats were believed to keep evil spirits away. A cat lounging on your windowsill wasn't just catching sunbeams, it was guarding your soul. So when a beloved cat died, what did you do? You mummified it, carefully, lovingly, sometimes with more ritual precision than you gave Uncle Hotep. And then you buried it, often in special cemeteries, just for sacred animals. Saqqara, for example, has entire catacombs of cat mummies. Some are curled in lifelike poses, wrapped in fine linen. Some even have painted or gilded faces, complete with delicate whiskers. But cats weren't the only ones with VIP death benefits. Ibises were sacred to Thoth, god of wisdom and writing. Thousands were mummified and offered in his honor. Bulls like the Apis bull were treated as living gods during their lifetime, worshipped pampered, and after death, buried in sarcophagi the size of small yachts. Their tombs at the Serapeum of Saqqara look like an underground fortress of stone coffins. Then there's the crocodile. Yes, crocodiles, feared in life but honored in death. Associated with Sobek, the fierce protector god with a crocodile head, these scaly beasts were often raised in temple pools, fed the ancient equivalent of high-end koi food, and upon death, mummified and entombed with offerings. One tomb held over 300 crocodile mummies, some wrapped, some painted, some even given jewelry. Scholars are still scratching their heads over that one. Did the crocodiles need bling, or did someone just have a flair for post-mortem, accessorizing quirky detail of the night one cat cemetery was found to contain mummified animals, and the occasional fake, that's right. Some mummified cats were just bundles of cloth with a few bones or even just mud inside. Egyptologists believe some may have been quick-made souvenirs or temple offerings for visitors who couldn't afford the full feline. Even dogs got afterlife attention. Anubis, the god of embalming, had a jackal or wild dog form, and actual pet dogs were often named on stelae with loving inscriptions. The faithful one, the barker, or he who brings joy. Some owners even had their dogs buried in miniature coffins, complete with bowls and collars. And the humble fish. Some species were sacred, especially in towns that associated them with rebirth and fertility. Whole schools were mummified and placed in ceramic jars like spiritual sardines. Birds, monkeys, rams, falcons, baboons. All of them appear in the archaeological record, carefully preserved for the next world. Some as offerings, some as pets, and others as literal embodiments of divine power. But what does this mean for you, lying here in your tomb, half listening to the shuffle of sacred paws? It means you might not be alone. Your pet cat, if you had one, may be buried nearby, perhaps curled next to you in a mini sarcophagus. Your favorite hunting falcon may soar above your soul in the field of reeds, snatching celestial fish. Your loyal dog might greet your ba at the tomb's threshold each night, tail wagging with divine purpose. The Egyptians saw the afterlife not just as a human affair, but a shared space. Life was teeming with animals. Why wouldn't eternity be too? And beyond companionship, animals carried meaning. A cat wasn't just a pet. It was the living image of Bastet. A cow might embody Hathor, a falcon Horus. To care for animals in life and to honor them in death was a form of devotion. Every pet tomb, every mummified ibis, every painted feline was an act of spiritual connection. Historians still debate how deeply everyday Egyptians understood the theology of animal worship. Were they all devout believers? Or did some just follow the rituals because their neighbor did? Either way, the sheer scale of animal mummification, millions of specimens, suggests a culture where creatures great and small were integral to eternity. So as the cat in your tomb slinks into a patch of moonlight and curls around the foot of your sarcophagus, you don't feel surprise, you feel company. A soft, purring reminder that in this vision of forever, you are never alone. You awaken or something like it. There's no sharp moment of awareness here in the afterlife, no jolt of panic or creaky stretch of ancient joints. Just a gentle return, like mist settling on warm stone. And as your ka hums contentedly beside you, and your ba stretches its wings for the nightly flight home, you feel something subtle but deep. A shift, a tug backward, not toward death again, but toward something older, more primal. The desert. Long before the tombs were filled with murals and the coffins wrapped in spells, there was the sand. And in that sand, a secret that changed everything: accidental immortality. Here's how it started. Imagine yourself in Egypt's prehistoric past, before pyramids, before writing, before the gods wore jackal heads and carried crooks and flails. Back then, people buried their dead, simply shallow graves, a few tools or pots, curled fetal positions, body pressed right into the earth. No coffins, no fancy wrappings, no pyramid schemes. And yet, those bodies lasted. Because Egypt has a secret ingredient most cultures don't, an almost magical combination of dry air, intense heat, and salty soil. You don't need linen bandages or oils. Just bury someone shallowly in this desert, and the sand does the rest. The heat dries out the soft tissues before bacteria can move in. The salt pulls moisture from the body like a natural sponge. The result, a human being preserved, not quite a mummy, but not gone either. The first Egyptians must have stumbled across this the way we stumble across forgotten leftovers, in the fridge, surprised, slightly disturbed, and very curious. They dug a grave. Time passed. Then a storm unearthed the remains, and there was Grandma still more or less intact. Historians believe these natural mummies might have sparked the idea that the body should be preserved forever. If the desert could keep the dead from decaying, maybe there was something divine in that process, something that needed to be harnessed, copied, perfected. And thus began Egypt's long love affair with intentional mummification. It didn't start with bandages and perfumes. It started with observation. Nature did it first. Humans simply followed and improved. But the desert didn't just preserve bodies. It also preserved memory. The very first burial grounds, places like Nakada, or the earliest tombs at Abydos, became sacred because of what the wind revealed. Bones, pottery, tools, evidence that the dead had been there and stayed. So the desert became something more than just a place to dump the dead. It became a threshold, a portal, a place where the boundary between the living and the eternal was tissue thin. And this belief, born from sand and sun, would shape the entire Egyptian worldview. Even the direction of the tombs reflected this. Bodies were laid with their heads toward the west, facing the setting sun, the symbolic gateway to the underworld. The western desert wasn't just dry land, it was the realm of the dead. To travel west after death was natural, expected, sacred. Over time, the tombs grew more elaborate, the graves deeper, bodies wrapped, painted hidden in chambers. But still, at the core of it all, that original idea the desert keeps you. Even in modern excavations, archaeologists often find naturally desiccated bodies in unexpected places, back corners of caves, under collapsed stone, or even resting in eroded sandbanks. These aren't the gilded kings or high priests. They're farmers, herders, workers, people who died without magic, without papyrus scrolls. And yet, they're still here, still shaped like themselves, still curled in that fetal sleep beneath the dunes, their hair intact, their fingernails dusty but whole. It's humbling, because it shows that immortality, at least in physical form, wasn't invented by priests or pharaohs. It was gifted by the earth. Quirky bit for the night one early desert burial included not just the body, but a bag of dried figs and a wooden comb, which honestly makes perfect sense. Who doesn't want to enter the afterlife with snacks and good hair? But this connection to the desert ran deeper than just preservation. It was philosophical. The Egyptians saw the desert not as a lifeless void, but as a force, chaotic, untamed, but also powerful. In their cosmology, the desert was the realm of Set God of storms and disorder. It was a place of testing, but also transformation. To be buried in the desert was to return to something ancient, pure. You were dissolving back into the land, but only physically. Spiritually, you were rising. Even tomb architecture mimicked desert geography. Mastabas resembled sandbanks. Pyramids rose like sun-baked hills. Rock-cut tombs were made to look like they'd always been there, emerging from the cliffs rather than being carved in. And the rituals, they often involved dust, sprinkled, smeared, poured over coffins, not just as a symbol of grief, but as a kind of alchemy. Earth to earth, yes, but also life from sand. Historians still discuss whether the early Egyptians fully understood the chemical processes behind natural mummification. Most agree they probably didn't, at least not scientifically. But spiritually, they knew enough. The desert teaches stillness, preservation, silence. And in that silence, the Egyptians heard something eternal. So as you lie wrapped in layers of linen and layers of belief, it's not the pyramid that keeps you intact. It's not the gold or the spells or even the Shabti army lined up behind your knees. It's the sand, the same sand that wrapped the first mummies before there were even words for death. The same sand that whispered to the first mortals that maybe, just maybe, you don't have to disappear. And that is a quiet kind of miracle. The sand sleeps quietly above your tomb. Time has softened. It reshaped the dunes, swallowed tracks and stories. But deep below, in a carved hollow of limestone and ritual, your soul rests not in loneliness, but in legacy. Because not far from where you lie down, a winding wadi in the cliffs near ancient Thebes is a village like no other. A place not of kings, not of priests, but of artists, workers, creators of eternity. Their chisels didn't build pyramids, they built afterlives. Welcome to Deir el Medina, the village of the tomb builders. This was no bustling metropolis. It was a purpose-built community, a tucked-away neighborhood of skilled laborers employed by the state to carve tombs for the pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings. Not just any tombs either. These were the elaborate color-soaked masterpieces of Egypt's new kingdom, designed to house the divine in stone. But these workers weren't just masons with good arms and bad backs. They were trained artisans, masters of detail, men and women, who could paint lotus petals so delicate they looked real 3 millennia later. hieroglyphic scribes who could chant the names of gods backward and still get the spell right. Craftspeople whose job wasn't just construction, it was creation of a spiritual launch pad. And Deir el Medina, it was their home, their sanctuary, and yes, their afterlife lab. This village was carefully walled, nestled in the cliffs for security and secrecy. After all, when your job involves carving the pharaoh's eternal secrets into stone, you don't want too many neighbors. The workers lived with their families in modest mud brick homes. The streets were narrow, the wells deep, and the gossip probably excellent. They had days off. They had beer. They had unions, well, something like them. When wages often paid in grain were delayed, the workers of Deir el Medina staged what's considered the first recorded labor strike in history. They left their chisels in the tomb and walked out demanding payment, peacefully, politely, but firmly. And yes, they won. Quirky fact for the night records found on ostraca scrap pottery used like sticky notes show workers calling in sick, taking time off for family matters, or even blaming hangovers. One simply reads, "Drunk, cannot come." Truly the original out-of-office memo. But here's where it gets fascinating. These artisans didn't just build tombs for the elite. They built their own. Tucked into the cliffs behind the village are beautifully decorated compact tombs designed with the same care they gave to kings. Painted ceilings, spells from the Book of the Dead, scenes of the afterlife where the artist is finally his own subject. One of the most famous belonging to a scribe named Sennacherib shows him and his wife, Aineferti, plowing fields in the field of reeds. Behind them are blooming trees, rows of golden barley, and distant mountains of pure peace. You can feel it. He made his afterlife by hand, and he wasn't alone. Many of the tombs here reflect personal touches. One shows a man playing music before Osiris with a peaceful smile. Another shows a family sitting under a fig tree. These weren't grand political monuments. They were quiet prayers, crafted by people who spent their waking lives creating eternal homes for others, and dared to believe they too deserved a slice of eternity. Historians still marvel at this. For all the talk of pharaohs and priests, Deir el Medina reveals the soul of ancient Egypt, its daily life, its doubts, its faith. Here we find love letters between spouses, records of dreams where the gods gave advice, even confessions scrawled on the back of broken bowls, asking forgiveness for bad thoughts or missed offerings. These people lived with death as a career, and yet they also lived fully. There's evidence of music jokes, stories passed on at bedtime. Children learned to draw beside their parents. Women held important economic roles. And when someone died, the village mourned together because eternity wasn't just a theory here. It was a craft. Yerba drifts through the alleyways of Deir el Medina, now invisible but not unwelcome. You pass the tiny shrine at the village entrance, where prayers to Hathor and Merit Sager, the cobra goddess of the mountain, still hang in the air like incense. And you realize these were the caretakers of legacy. They touched eternity with calloused hands. They wrapped magic into pigment-folded prayers, into chisel strokes, and when they died, they trusted that their own images, scratched lovingly into stone, would speak their names forever. One fringe theory even suggests that certain workers may have smuggled spells into their own tombs, bonus verses from the pharaoh's Book of the Dead slipped in quietly between lines. Not theft, not plagiarism, just a soul trying to be ready. And now, centuries later, archaeologists uncover these tombs untouched by robbers, still glowing with color, still whispering, "This was me. I lived, I dreamed, I prepared." So as your spirit lingers in this village of memory, you understand something profound. The afterlife wasn't built by kings. It was built by hands. The tombs of Deir el Medina fade behind you, glowing like pocket lanterns in the cliffs, each one a quiet voice, still whispering its owner's name. Your ba drifts upward on a soft, sunless wind, heading east toward the Nile, toward cities and temples and halls where another kind of magic lives not in stone, but in ink. Because while artisans shaped the afterlife with chisels and brushes, another group had an even more delicate tool, the reed pen. Tonight you float beside the quiet footsteps of Egypt's scribes, those brilliant, ink-stained minds who captured eternity with a flick of the wrist. They didn't build tombs, they wrote them, and they were essential. In a world powered by ritual and ruled by memory, the ability to read and write was pure alchemy. Scribes weren't just clerks. They were architects of the soul, entrusted with shaping spells, names, and instructions that could literally save you from being eaten by a chaos demon with a crocodile face. No pressure, right? Let's start with the tools. The Egyptian scribe carried a palette, a slim wooden board with shallow wells of red and black ink, and 2 reed brushes tucked neatly into slots. He'd scoop crushed pigments mixed with water, using his pen, dipping it just enough to sketch a line of hieroglyphs that might outlast an empire. And those hieroglyphs, oh, they were more than pretty pictures. They were words, sounds, and magic. A scribe had to master over 700 unique signs, some phonetic, some symbolic, some just there to make the gods happy. Every bird, ripple, and outstretched arm meant something. A mistake wasn't just sloppy, it could doom the soul. One accidental reversal, and instead of saying, "May his heart be pure," you might write, "May his heart be eaten," which would not go over well at the weighing ceremony. That's why scribes trained for years, often starting as young boys, under the guidance of temple priests. They copied religious texts until they bled ink. They recited royal annals and cataloged grain deliveries. They learned to write on papyrus, on potsherds on walls, and when they were finally good enough, they got to write the most powerful thing of all, a spell. Because every tomb, every coffin, every canopic jar had to be inscribed. And not with random phrases, with formulas from what we now call the Book of the Dead, the pyramid texts, or the coffin texts, hundreds of them, carefully arranged, mathematically spaced, spiritually coded. Spell 17, summary of everything that exists. Spell 125, the judgment scene. Spell 29, how to keep your heart from betraying you. Spell 151, how to tie your mummy bandages properly. Yes, that's real. Each was written by hand, each one personalized with the name of the deceased. And while some were lovingly drafted with gold ink on long rolls of papyrus, others were scratched onto shards of pottery, humble, but just as sacred. Scribes had to be precise, but also inventive. Every name they wrote brought a soul one step closer to eternity. Every god they invoked had to be pleased. Some scribes even added flourishes, extra prayers, poetic verses, or quiet jokes hidden in the lines. One spell warns the dead not to trip over their own feet in the afterlife. Another includes the line, May his breath not stink. That's right. Even in the next world, personal hygiene was a concern. Here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeologists once found a scribe's doodles on the back of a legal document, tiny drawings of dancing girls, animals, and even caricatures of the king, proof that even spiritual calligraphers needed to unwind. But beyond their wit, scribes wielded power. They could grant immortality with a sentence. By writing your name and placing it near your body, they ensured your identity wouldn't fade. That's why enemies of the state weren't just punished physically, they had their names erased. Because to be forgotten was worse than death. It meant your name soul was unanchored. Some scribes took it even further. They wrote texts meant to trick the gods, spells with hidden passages, paths through the underworld filled with clever wordplay. If you couldn't afford a full scroll, a skilled scribe might inscribe your coffin with the highlights, the cosmic equivalent of a shortcut. And some they wrote only for themselves. Just outside the great temples of Karnak and Luxor, you'll find little graffiti scratched into the stone, lines of poetry, quiet prayers. One simply says, "I was here and loved." Another, "May I never thirst." Historians still debate whether scribes believed in the literal power of their ink or if they saw it as ritual. But judging by the meticulousness of their work, by how many coffins, walls, and jars are still wrapped in their handwriting, thousands of years later, it's clear they believed in something. And tonight, as your ba glides into one of those tombs, you see the proof. The walls glow with color, even after centuries. Blue and red and gold dance across the stone. Lines of text shimmer faintly in the torchlight. The name of the deceased repeats over and over each time, like a heartbeat. You read a line aloud, just softly, and the air shifts, the spell listens, the name glows, and somewhere beyond the field of reeds, a soul stirs with recognition, because that's what scribes did. They didn't just write words, they wrote existence. You look down at the line of script still fresh on the wall, hieroglyphs of birds and suns and silent walking legs, and you understand a chisel carves stone, but a pen carves time. Time drips like honey here. You've visited tombs, sat through your own funeral, watched divine bureaucracies hum with judgment, and listened to scribes whisper eternity into ink. You might think by now everything's calm, settled, that once your tomb door sealed, nothing could touch you again. But eternity is long, and tombs do not always stay closed. You feel at first like a draft in the spirit world, cold crawling wrong. Something has disturbed the order, not a demon, not a soul gone rogue, a tomb robber. Yes, even in a civilization as meticulous about death as Egypt, there was one persistent, inconvenient problem: other people. Tombs weren't just final resting places, they were treasure vaults, and unfortunately not everyone respected the whole eternal peace clause. Gold jewels, fine linens, sacred oils, even Shabti figurines, everything had value. And when times got hard, well, let's just say temptation didn't always wait for the pharaoh to finish reincarnating. So tonight, we're slipping into the shadowy world of grave-robbing curses, optional. Imagine this, it's the middle of the night. A pair of desperate men creep through the desert faces, wrapped against the wind tools clutched tight. They've bribed someone, a guard, a gravedigger, maybe even a priest. They know the tomb layout, or think they do. Their hearts race. Their feet sink into sand, and before long, they find it. A sealed door, a faint scent of incense long since faded. They pry it open, and you're still in there, watching, silent, intact, until now. They crack open your coffin like a storage chest, rifling through wrappings. They yank amulets, toss aside protective spells, like packing peanuts, and tug gold rings from brittle fingers. Sometimes they even unwrap your face, just to see if your eyes are real. Rude, the ancient Egyptians knew this would happen. In fact, they expected it, which is why they got creative. Many tombs were built with decoys, false burial chambers, filled with fake goods to distract looters. Others included curses carved into the walls. One famously warned, "He who enters this tomb shall be eaten by a crocodile and a serpent, and the hippopotamus shall swallow him whole." Mild overkill, perhaps, but imagine being looted after death and then failing your cosmic judgment because someone stole your heart scarab. You'd want a backup plan too. Quirky detail of the night, some tombs had booby traps, not like Indiana Jones spikes from the walls stuff, but collapsing corridors, confusing layouts, or even passages intentionally filled with rubble to slow intruders. A few even featured dummy mummies, a decoy body wrapped, and laid out to trick thieves into thinking they'd found the real deal. And still, most of them got robbed anyway. Even the great tombs in the Valley of the Kings weren't immune. By the time archaeologists arrived in the 19th and 20th centuries, almost all had been emptied centuries before. The lone exception, Tutankhamun, whose tomb was buried beneath rubble and forgotten making its discovery in 1922, such a spectacular historical accident. But what about the people who robbed the tombs? Surprisingly, we know a lot about them. Ancient police reports, preserved on papyrus detail, entire investigations into grave robbing rings. The stolen goods were sometimes sold in city markets or smuggled into other tombs to be reused. One thief confessed after getting drunk and bragging. Another was betrayed by his accomplice for a better cut. And the punishment brutal. If caught, robbers could be tortured, mutilated, or executed. But sometimes they escaped, and the evidence vanished with them. Until that is someone stumbled upon a looted tomb, a half-unwrapped mummy, an amulet discarded in haste. What's incredible is how often this happened in every era. Robbers weren't just a New Kingdom problem. From the very beginning, even as the first mastabas were built, people tried to get inside. Why? Because the afterlife was expensive. Burials cost a fortune. And when famine hit or war raged, the wealth hidden underground looked suspiciously like survival. The gods might frown, but hunger is louder than judgment. Still, you couldn't take chances, which is why tomb designers began shifting strategies. Instead of big, obvious monuments like pyramids, they moved toward invisible tombs hidden beneath cliffs, sealed with camouflaged stone, guarded by curses, and protected by silence. The Valley of the Kings is a prime example. No towering structures, just unmarked doorways cut into hillsides, long tunnels, winding chambers, deep shafts to discourage intruders. But even those were eventually discovered. And yet in the end, the robbers didn't win everything. Because while they took your gold, your jewelry, your perfume, and your feathered sandals, they couldn't take your name. Not if it was painted enough times. Not if it was carved in the heart of a statue, written into the folds of a scroll, whispered by family in prayer. Your body may be disturbed, but your soul remains. Still, you can't help but feel a quiet sadness lying open like a book no one finished reading. Your charms stripped, your face uncovered. A tomb meant to last forever, now emptied by hands that feared not divine wrath, but poverty. You don't seek revenge. That's not your path. But you feel the weight of a world that never stops moving even in death. And far above the sand shifts again. Time brushes away the footsteps of thieves. The wind seals what stone cannot, and your name, it still flickers faintly on the wall. A final line etched in haste, but with hope. He who lives in truth shall rise again, and you will, because truth outlasts gold. You've seen the palaces of the dead, the libraries of spells, the shrines of amulets, and even the criminal underworld of afterlife burglary. But now it's time to leave the pharaohs behind. Step out of the golden halls, shrink down, strip away the gold masks and leopard skin priests. Because this time, we're not talking about kings, we're talking about you. Not you, the honored mummy curled in a luxurious limestone crypt. You, the average Egyptian, a brewer, a basket weaver, a farmer, someone with sore feet, a noisy goat, and just enough savings to buy sandals and a good comb. What happened to you when you died? Because believe it or not, ancient Egypt's obsession with the afterlife wasn't exclusive to pharaohs. Over time, the vision of eternity evolved from elite privilege to something astonishingly democratic. In earlier periods, only royals had a guaranteed seat on the boat to the field of reeds. Everyone else, well, best of luck. But by the Middle Kingdom, something began to shift. The spells once etched only on pyramid walls started appearing on coffins, not royal coffins, but those of middle-class officials and priests. And from there, things spread. You didn't need a pyramid anymore. You needed preparation, belief, and ideally a bit of Papyrus 101. So now, let's say you're Nact, a village scribe with a fondness for figs and mediocre poetry. You've saved up enough for a proper burial. Nothing flashy but respectable. Your coffin is made of wood painted carefully, with eyes on the side so you can see the offerings laid out for you. You hire a temple scribe to copy a few crucial spells onto your coffin panels. Spell 125, the big judgment one, check. A few protective charms, check. Maybe even spell 148, which is supposed to let you transform into a falcon if things go badly and you need a quick escape. Smart thinking. You can't afford a full Book of the Dead scroll. Those are expensive, but you commission a short version, like an abridged spiritual manual, bare bones but still potent. Your wife Hainet bakes extra loaves for the funeral offerings. Your sons craft little figurines shabtis, even if they're made of clay instead of faience. One of them draws a tiny boat with stick figures and a duck which he swears is you and the gods hanging out. It's terrible. It's perfect. You are wrapped blessed and buried in a rock-cut tomb with a few neighbors in the cliffside above your village. It's small. It leaks, but it's yours. And somehow that's enough, because by now the belief has grown. People understand that the gods care not just for royalty, but for anyone who walks in Ma'at truth, balance, humility. You don't need to be Pharaoh. You just need to be decent, honest, remembered. One fringe theory suggests that community rituals, annual feasts, shared prayers tending of local tombs acted as spiritual co-ops. If your family couldn't offer bread every week, your neighbors might do it for you. Because if everyone cared for each other's dead, everyone could be sustained. It's like social security, but with incense and more onions. Tombs from this era are filled with everyday scenes: fishing, baking, drinking with friends, not golden thrones, just life, continued, imagined, hoped for. Here's a quirky example. The tomb of a man named Khnumhotep includes a painting of him playing a game with his wife, like ancient backgammon. Another man's tomb shows him fishing from a little boat with his teenage son. One includes a scene of a woman opening a jar of beer with a smile so genuine it practically bursts from the wall, because their afterlife didn't need to be grand. It just needed to be familiar. This growing accessibility had ripple effects. Even the gods started showing up differently. Instead of distant cosmic forces, they appeared in domestic scenes. Osiris offering grapes, Anubis adjusting someone's funeral wrappings like a careful uncle, Hathor welcoming the dead with a cool drink and a hug. The divine became personal. Of course, not everyone made it. Poverty wore plague, some died without rites, without names. And yes, many common burials were simple pits, unmarked and unremembered. But even then, families might whisper their names. Light a lamp, scribble a line on a piece of pottery and bury it nearby, because even the smallest remembrance mattered. Historians still debate how widespread this democratization truly was. Was it real belief or state propaganda? Did peasants really expect eternity, or was it just hopeful imitation of the elite? But the evidence speaks, and it says they tried. They buried their dead facing west. They made little offerings. They copied spells with mistakes in the hieroglyphs, but the intent was there. Even now, archaeologists uncover tombs belonging to people like Che, a doorkeeper, or Irie, a grain measurer. Their coffins are worn, but their names remain. Their hands painted brown, their sandals inked with care, their eyes drawn wide open, ready. Because eternity wasn't for the perfect, it was for the prepared. And tonight, as your bog glides past their tombs, you nod in recognition. A woman sits with a faded bowl of pomegranates. A man offers a fish to his shadow. Their spells are short. Their tombs are cracked, but their souls shine. And you realize the afterlife was never about kings. It was about continuity. And anyone at all could earn their place in it. By now, your spirit has drifted through palaces and prayers past golden sarcophagi and cliffside cottages. You've seen how even the humblest villager could script their name into eternity. But you also know something else, something deep, almost uncomfortable. Not everyone stayed buried, because over time tombs were reused, graves were repurposed, coffins were recycled, and the afterlife. It started to look a bit like a real estate market during a particularly chaotic dynasty. Tonight you slip silently into a tomb that once belonged to a man named Intef. His name is still faintly visible on the wall painted in loving red ink. But there's something strange here. The face on the coffin, not his. The burial shroud, different style. The funerary figurines hastily scrawled over his name, scratched out and replaced with someone else's. You're looking at one of Egypt's most pragmatic traditions, tomb recycling. As romantic as eternal rest sounds, Egypt was a living, breathing civilization, and it had limited space, especially in the popular necropolises like Thebes or Saqqara. Combine that with political collapse, economic hardship, and a few centuries of chaotic transitions, and suddenly prime burial spots were up for grabs. Sometimes this was sanctioned, sometimes not. Let's start with the official route. When a dynasty fell, the new one didn't always build from scratch. Reusing tombs, especially those of officials from previous regimes, was cost effective. Why spend 30 years carving a mountain when you could chisel off a few names and slap on your own pharaohs did it? Priests did it. Even scribes did it. This practice had a name usurpation, and while it sounds aggressive, it wasn't always seen as disrespectful. Some believed the tomb's magical essence remained intact. Others thought the new name simply overrode the old one, like updating your email signature. The soul of the previous occupant. Hopefully, they had already settled into the field of reeds and weren't using the place anymore. But it wasn't always so polite. There are cases where a body was removed, shoved into a side chamber, or discarded entirely. The tomb was then renovated: new paint, new spells, new amulets. Think of it like spiritual house flipping. A little whitewash, a fresh statue of Osiris, and voila, new tomb, who this quirky detail of the Night One tomb had 3 different owners over a 200-year period. Each painted over the previous names, repurposed the offerings, and added new inscriptions. By the end, the wall looked like a chalkboard at a very confused magic school. But sometimes the reuse was desperate. In times of famine, war, or plague, families had no choice. Tombs were expensive, so when someone died and the money wasn't there for a fresh burial, they would borrow a nearby shaft, maybe even one belonging to a long-forgotten relative. Bodies were tucked in wherever there was space, side niches, stairwells, even at the foot of another mummy's coffin. And this wasn't just for the poor. Even royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings were compromised. During the Third Intermediate Period, high priests of Amun secretly opened tombs, retrieved royal mummies, and reburied them in hidden caches, wrapped tightly together, stripped of treasures but preserved from robbers. Well, because tomb robbing had gotten so rampant, it was the only way to protect the dead. Imagine it: dozens of royal mummies, tucked side by side in a single shaft, their identities labeled on linen tags like luggage in a divine storage unit. Modern archaeologists found one such cache in Deir el-Bahari. Inside Ramses II, Seti I, Thutmose III, once great rulers of the world, now stacked like cordwood for their own safety. Historians still debate the ethics of this practice. Were the priests honoring the kings by saving their bodies, or disrespecting them by erasing their sacred tombs? Maybe both. And what about the souls? Did the Ka mind having its tomb hijacked? Did the BA get confused trying to return home, only to find its face replaced and its food offerings swapped out for someone else's beer preference? We don't know. But the Egyptians tried to smooth it over. In many cases, they left traces of the original owner's name in the margins just in case, or they added new prayers asking forgiveness for the sharing. Some texts even included appeals to Osiris, requesting he honor both souls equally. You hover now in one such tomb. The paint is layered, one name scratched and another carefully written over it. But the images, they overlap. A man in a white kilt stands beside 2 different wives. One was likely his, the other a recycled edition. It's strange, it's awkward, but it's real, because death, like life, isn't always clean or noble. It's messy, compromised, rearranged, and somehow that makes it more human. Even in the field of reeds, You might meet someone whose tomb once belonged to 3 other people, someone whose Book of the Dead scroll was pieced together from discarded pages, someone whose mummy rests in a coffin a foot too short. But they're there, and that matters, because despite the confusion, despite the scratches and substitutions, the intention remains. The names may change, the paint may flake, the walls may echo with borrowed prayers, but the soul remembers. You linger in the quiet of a reused tomb. It's not yours, not exactly, but somehow it still works. Your Ka finds the offerings, your Ba returns at night. The spells, even borrowed, still hum with power. And then your gaze drifts to the wall. Not a grand mural, not a golden shrine, just a door. But it's not a real door. It's carved, painted to look like one. A tall rectangle flanked by images of offerings, and sometimes a short inscription. There's no handle, no hinges. Yet it's the most important door in the tomb, because it isn't meant for the living. It's for you. You've just found a false door, one of ancient Egypt's most elegant spiritual hacks. It might seem simple, even symbolic, but to the Egyptians this wasn't decorative. This was functional architecture for the dead, a portal through which the soul could pass between worlds. Let's break it down. A false door was usually placed on the west wall of the tomb. Remember, the land of the dead lay in the west. The living would come here to present offerings, food, incense, beer. They'd speak your name, say prayers. Sometimes they'd sit in front of it and talk as if you were still right there, because in a way you were. The door wasn't just a metaphor, it was a threshold, a spiritual doorway for your Ka to come and go. During the day, it might rest near your body, but at night or when offerings were brought, it would emerge, drift through the door, and receive the gifts. And it wasn't a one-way street. This is how you visited them too. The living, through dreams, through coincidences, through the soft nudge of memory. The door was a bridge, and your soul walked across it both ways. Some doors were intricately carved, almost three-dimensional, with lintel jambs and tiny offering tables beneath. Others were simple rectangles, with a few painted lines and the deceased's name. But even the most modest one was believed to function the same. And here's the quirky part: Egyptians often left real food and drink at the base of these doors. Loaves, beer jars, onions, meats. And if they couldn't afford the real thing, they painted them. Because the magic didn't require physical ingredients, just representation and intention. There were even offering lists carved beside the door. 1,000 of bread, 1,000 of beer, 1,000 of cattle, and so on. The 1,000 wasn't literal, it was aspirational. A magical abundance to keep you going in the afterlife buffet line. Sometimes, the false door would include a carved image of you seated at an offering table, serene waiting. And there you'd sit for eternity, gazing out from the stone, accepting gifts, remembering your name. Historians still puzzle over exactly how the Egyptians thought this worked. Was it a symbolic passage for the Ko-A metaphysical junction, point A dream anchor? There's no single answer, but what's clear is that the door wasn't false at all, not to them. It was as real as any hallway, just meant for a different kind of footstep. And the tradition lasted, from the old kingdom all the way into the new tombs, included these spiritual exits. Even cenotaphs' memorial tombs without bodies got them, because the door didn't care whether your bones were still behind it. What mattered was that it marked the spot where memory and magic met. Some of the most touching false doors show signs of wear scratches, from fingers soot from oil lamps, even ancient graffiti. People visited these doors for generations, continuing to bring offerings, continuing to speak the name of the dead long after their own children had passed. You float now in front of one. There's a young man kneeling at its base. He's not your son, or even your grandson. He's your great something. He doesn't remember your face, but he knows your name. He's saying it now with reverence, and as he does, your caw stirs. The offering may be symbolic, the beer flat, the bread crumbly, but the act is fresh. It pulses. It matters. Because in Egypt, death wasn't isolation. It was interaction. The dead weren't gone. They were present in dreams, in rituals, in the tilt of an eye painted on a coffin, in the whispered name spoken at a stone door. And these doors weren't just built in tombs. They appeared in temples, shrines, even homes. Anywhere a connection to the dead was needed, a false door could be carved. It was the ancient equivalent of keeping a family photo on the wall, only this one worked both ways. In some rare cases, these doors weren't just spiritual, they were interactive. Tombs have been found with niches where food could be slid through, or holes through which incense was blown. Some even had small benches in front of the door for guests to sit and share a moment. One fringe theory even suggests the layout of entire tombs may have been designed around the location of the false door, because that's where communication happened. And tonight, you don't just look at the door, you pass through it, not physically, not even consciously, but spiritually. You move through memory, through sound, through the breath of a descendant who still somehow says your name correctly. You drift into a dream, into a moment, into the life of someone who doesn't know they're being visited, but feels it all the same. And then, as softly as a sigh, you return. The false door fades back into stone, but the connection remains. The door behind you settles back into silent stone once more. No squeaks, no creaks, no golden glow. Just that faint hum of spiritual circuitry you now recognize as normal in this side of existence. The field of reeds calls softly from the distance, but tonight your paw isn't quite ready to glide back there just yet. Because now you want to see where you're actually going. Not in metaphor, not in poetry, but in layout. Because the afterlife wasn't some formless cloud. It had a structure, a map. And at the heart of it all was a place every Egyptian hoped to reach, the field of reeds, or Sekhet Aru, the paradise that made all the sand and scarabs and careful liver jars worth it. Picture it now. It's Egypt, but upgraded. An eternal countryside where barley grows taller than your head. The river never floods too much. The sun never scorches. The wind is always soft. Boats drift on perfect water. And every harvest is abundant, without back pain or biting insects. This is heaven, not above the sky, but just beyond the horizon. A better version of the world you already knew, because who wants to spend eternity in some abstract void when you could have your favorite fields forever, and you get a house, yes, a house, decorated however your caw prefers. Courtyard, pool, sycamore trees, all perfectly kept. You'll be visited by relatives, neighbors, friendly spirits, maybe even your favorite cat now gloriously reborn and still not listening to you. The field of reeds is not exclusive. Well, it used to be. Back in the pyramid text days, only pharaohs got a plot. But by the New Kingdom, the dream expanded. Thanks to democratized tomb rituals, average Egyptians could aspire to an eternal field of their own if they passed judgment and remembered their spells. And yet there was more than one version of paradise. Some texts describe the afterlife as a realm with real geography rivers, islands gates. Others talk about 12 divisions of the night, each ruled by a different deity. Some write of sailing with Ra on his daily journey, helping him battle the great serpent of chaos, Apophis, before sunrise. The truth, there wasn't a single agreed-upon vision. The afterlife was personalized. You might find yourself plowing endless golden fields, or fishing in a sacred lake with your father, or dancing in a temple courtyard under moonlight while harpists play. You might become a star drifting through the sky with the blessed dead, or a falcon soaring with Horus over the mountains of sunrise. The most important thing was this: it was good, peaceful, safe, and it was earned. Now here's your quirky fringe theory for tonight. Some Egyptologists believe the field of reeds wasn't just a pleasant eternity. It may have served as a kind of cosmic reboot, a training ground for becoming one with the divine. That eternity wasn't just leisure, it was ascension. Maybe you started out plowing ghost barley and sipping magic beer, but eventually you might join the gods, speak the secret words, help Ra repel darkness every night, transcend your human story, and become immortal in more than just memory. But let's not rush. For now, you've arrived. You glide over tall papyrus, your sandals never catching. You smell onions sweet and sharp from a kitchen nearby. Laughter rises over the reeds. Someone sings a song you knew in childhood. And best of all, no mosquitoes. You pass through open-air market stalls. Everything's free because ownership doesn't exist here the way it did before. Goods are symbolic. Food is spiritual essence. You want a figs? You just wish it, and it's there. A breeze scented with lotus and cinnamon rustles the linen of your afterlife robes. You reach a boat, your old boat somehow better. Fresh paint, polished wood, a full crew all smiling like they're in on the joke that none of this costs money anymore. You board. The water parts, the river sings. And across the shore, Osiris stands in a field waving. He doesn't say much. He doesn't need to. You made it. And yet there's room for work if you want it. Not labor, not toil, but purpose. You can help guide other souls. Teach them their names again. Recite their spells when they forget. You can tend to celestial gardens or help write new verses of the Book of the Dead tailored to the souls yet unborn. The gods don't demand it, but they smile when you do. Historians still debate whether the field of reeds was believed to be eternal, unchanging bliss, or a kind of divine school, a phase before the next great transformation. Some ancient texts hint at an eventual merging with the stars. Others leave it open-ended. But what's clear is this: no one feared it. It was home, a perfect version of the Nile, the world purified and preserved. So now, as your Ba folds its wings and your Ka sips from a cup of endless wine, you settle into a bench beneath a sycamore tree, one tended by Hathor herself, goddess of love and music and joy. She offers you fruit, a jug of cool water. A glance that says you're exactly where you're supposed to be. You lean back, the fields rustle, the river breathes, and you know the journey was worth it. The wind through the reeds carries laughter tonight, light and melodic, like someone has just told a joke that transcends species and timelines. It's not thunderous. Nothing in this realm is. It simply weaves through the air like incense from an altar. And somewhere past the soft ripple of the Nile, a drum taps once, twice, 3 times. You follow the sound, because the afterlife, while peaceful, is far from static. Tonight, you're headed somewhere special, not to a judgment hall or a field of barley, but to a festival, an ancient tradition that Egyptians didn't just celebrate in life, but hoped to continue forever. Welcome to the beautiful festival of the valley. If you died in Thebes, or just happened to live there before dying, this festival was the event. Not just for the living, for the dead. Once a year during the harvest season, the people of Thebes crossed the Nile in boats, journeying from the busy eastern city to the quiet western necropolis, from life to death, from the land of the sun to the land of the setting sun. But they didn't come with tears. They came with joy. This was a reunion. Picture it: long lines of boats decorated with flowers and ribbons bobbing across the river. Families dressed in festival linen, musicians playing flutes and harps, priests leading chants, offerings packed in baskets, bread, beer, onions, perfumes. Everyone headed across the Nile, not to mourn their ancestors, but to party with them. Because during this festival, the dead were thought to awaken. Not like zombies, don't worry, more like honored guests arriving at a banquet. Their ba could return passing through false doors and drifting into the tomb courtyards where their descendants gathered. Offerings were laid, names were spoken, jokes were told, libations were poured on the ground with purpose, and the dead, they listened. They were present. Some families would even sleep overnight in tomb chapels, curled beside the painted walls, hoping to dream of their ancestors, or with them. These weren't solemn vigils. They were slumber parties with the other side. People sang songs, played games, maybe flirted a little if the dead didn't mind. One inscription even records a man joking that his uncle drank too much wine during the festival, despite being dead for 20 years. Now you hover invisibly beside one of these family gatherings. A woman places flowers at the base of her grandmother's false door. Her young son mimics her placing his own tiny drawing 3 stick figures and a sun on the offering table. Your ba hums. This is what remembrance feels like. And for those buried far from home, this festival became even more important. Priests would conduct collective rituals for the forgotten, the poor, the ones whose names had faded. They'd read from scrolls, light incense, and call out, "May all those in this necropolis be awakened, be fed, be whole." Even if no one visited your tomb, you weren't left behind. And this wasn't the only festival where the dead made the guest list. There was also the Feast of Wag, held at the beginning of the inundation season when the Nile began to rise. People would float little boats made of papyrus down the river, honoring the dead and asking for safe passage into the afterlife. Another was the Feast of Koyak, tied to Osiris himself. During this time, reenactments of his death and rebirth were performed in temples and villages. Corn dolls representing Osiris were planted in soil to germinate, symbolizing resurrection. And guess what? You, the ordinary soul, weren't just watching, you were part of it. Because Osiris wasn't a distant deity. He was the model for your own story. If he could die and rise, so could you. These rituals were reminders not just of your fate, but of your potential. Quirky detail for tonight: during some festivals, people wore amulets shaped like lettuce, not because they loved salad, but because lettuce was associated with fertility and rebirth in Egyptian symbolism. It grew quickly, looked vaguely mystical when bolted, and according to the myths, was a favorite food of the god men. So yes, sacred salad jewelry. And these celebrations weren't minor. They lasted for days, sometimes weeks. Entire towns transformed into ritual theaters. Temples were decorated. Food was shared. Public prayers rose with the scent of roasting goose. Historians still debate whether everyone truly believed the dead showed up to these events, or if it was more symbolic. But judging by the effort, by how many tombs include festival scenes, how many prayers request presence during the great feast, there's no doubt hope mattered. The idea that death didn't end the conversation, that your descendants might still invite you to dinner, that your tomb wouldn't just be a vault, but a venue. So now, as the music floats over the desert again, your biah swirls in the wind, you don't feel like a ghost. You feel like a guest. You drift into a courtyard where a group has laid out food, not because they think you're starving, but because they remember. You stand beside a boy who's drawing you without knowing your face. You feel the warmth of firelight, the rhythm of ancient flutes, and the tug of memory made real. This is not haunting. This is homecoming. And in the distance, as the festival wind carries the last embers into the sky, you hear it, your name spoken with laughter and love. You glide home through the cool hush of the west wind, past tombs still warm with laughter, offerings still fragrant with onions and sweet dates. The beautiful festival of the valley fades like incense, but something lingers. Not the music, not the smoke, the memory. And that's no accident. Tonight we're peeling back the linen layers of one of the most important forces in ancient Egyptian afterlife philosophy. Not a god, not a spell, not even a structure, a name. Because in Egypt, names weren't just convenient labels shouted across the field to say, "Hey, Horemheb, you left your sandals in the boat again." A name was a vital piece of your soul. It was called the Ren, and without it, you weren't just forgotten, you were erased. You see, the Egyptians believed the soul had many parts, Kaba'ach shadow body, and the Ren held them all together. It was your identity, your echo, your immortality engine. As long as someone said your name, you remained real, present, capable of enjoying offerings, capable of existing. But the moment your name was lost, you were gone, not just socially, spiritually, which is why names were everywhere in Egyptian tombs, on coffins, on statues, on walls, on amulets, on offerings, even scratched into the soles of sandals, because you wanted your name to go wherever your soul might wander. And not just in this world, in every world. Even the humble Shabtai figurines carried names yours, etched carefully on their bellies. Because when they were summoned to do labor in the afterlife, you didn't want there to be any confusion. Yes, I'm here to plow the spiritual barley. Yes, the names Nakht, N-A-K-H-T. Some coffins had the name written hundreds of times in every direction, horizontally, vertically, in case one side faded, in case the reader approached upside down. Because redundancy wasn't annoying, it was protective. One quirky tomb featured a man's name written so many times it bordered on obsessive. Scholars debated whether he was deeply spiritual or just deeply anxious. Either way, it worked. We still know his name. And then there were the name erasers, because just as a name preserved the soul, destroying it destroyed the person. Erasing someone's name from a tomb, a statue, or a monument wasn't just vandalism. It was spiritual assassination. If no one could read or speak your name, your ka wouldn't be recognized. Your ba wouldn't know where to return. Your ren would fade. You'd become what the Egyptians most feared, a mutt, a dead thing. Not a blessed soul, not even a cursed one, just gone. And they feared this deeply. That's why damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory, was such a terrifying fate. It wasn't just for traitors. It was for anyone who had crossed too far, offended too greatly, fallen too hard. Their names were scratched off temple walls, chiseled out of tombs, even reversed in sacred texts, so they wouldn't be uttered accidentally. Famous case, Hatshepsut, the powerful female pharaoh. After her death, her stepson Thutmose III had her names and images systematically removed from monuments. Scholars still argue why. Political spite, patriarchal backlash, an effort to rewrite history. Whatever the reason, it nearly worked. Her name vanished from the king lists. For a time, Egypt forgot her, but not forever. The archaeologists uncovered her tomb, her statues, her sarcophagus, and most importantly, her name. Hatshepsut lives again, but many didn't. Peasants, servants, victims of poorly maintained tombs. The wind scoured their names from stele. The sun faded their ink, and without a voice to carry them forward, they vanished. This is why funerary inscriptions often include a simple but profound request: speak my name that I may live again. And so people did. They passed down names through generations. Children were named after grandparents. Offerings were made with a whispered dedication. Even a half-muttered reference during a festival could count. Because in Egypt, memory wasn't a luxury. It was life support. But it wasn't just about being remembered. It was also about being known correctly. Your name had to be spoken with care. That's why scribes triple-checked spellings, why priests recited names with ritual intonation, why even kings listed their full royal titulary, birth name, throne name, god name, location name. To speak the wrong name, that was a different kind of erasure, and it works the other way too. If you knew someone's true name, you held power over them. This crops up in mythology. In one story, the goddess Isis tricks Ra into revealing his secret name, a dangerous divine act that grants her access to hidden knowledge. It's not just clever, it's cosmic hacking, because a name was not just what people called you, it was who you were. And tonight you find yourself floating through a ruin, a tomb crumbled by time. The paint faded, so the walls cracked, the body inside long gone. But on a broken lintel, barely visible in moonlight, is a single word, a name. You speak it. You don't know who they were. You don't know what they believed or how they lived. But in that moment, they stir, a spark, a breath. The wren flares for just a second, and in that second, they exist again, because names aren't noise. They're resurrection. A name drifts from your lips like a leaf on the Nile, one syllable, then another, then silence. You feel something shift, not dramatic, not divine thunder or trumpet blaring glory, just a presence, a shimmer in the air, a memory that breathes, and just like that someone long forgotten is not. But what if that someone wasn't forgotten? What if that someone was you? Because tonight we descend into a quieter layer of the Egyptian afterlife obsession, one that hums beneath all the gold and grandeur. It's not a god, it's not a tomb, it's something stranger. Your shadow. Yes, your shoot. You've probably felt it this whole time, lingering at your feet, flickering in the corner of your vision as your ba takes flight. But the Egyptians didn't think shadows were just tricks of the sun. They believed your shadow was a literal part of your soul, not poetic, not metaphorical, actual, tangible, personal, and they treated it accordingly. In Egyptian thought, the shadow followed you everywhere, not just physically, but spiritually. If your body was the vessel and your ba the personality, then your shiut was your aura, your imprint, the echo that moved with you but had a life of its own. Some believed the shadow could act independently, that it could detach, move through spaces where the body or ka couldn't go. Others saw it as a kind of emotional weather, a reflection of your state of being. And just like your name, your shadow could be protected or destroyed. You'll find references to the shiot in funerary texts, where spells were written to ensure the shadow followed the deceased safely into the afterlife. Some rituals even included symbolic shadows, drawings, cutouts, even dolls that were buried alongside the dead to serve as shadow stand-ins, just in case yours wandered off. That's right, a backup shadow. Quirky? Yes. But it makes sense when you realize the shiat wasn't just personal, it was also vulnerable. If someone harmed your shadow, they harmed you. If they bound your shadow, you might never reach the field of reeds. Some curses even targeted the shadow, directly hoping to sever it from the rest of your soul and strand you forever. Which is why in tomb art, you sometimes see a tiny dark figure, another you painted beneath the feet or to the side of the main figure. That's not artistic flair. That's your shiut carefully included so that it too would be preserved. And here's a fringe theory for you. Some Egyptologists believe the shiut was also the record keeper of your actions, not the heart, not the ba, but your shadow, always watching, always remembering, which might explain why in some funerary spells the deceased pleads, "May my shadow not testify against me." Yes, even your own shadow might rat you out in court. Thanks, buddy. But despite the paranoia, the Egyptians didn't fear their shadows. They honored them. The shadow was proof of presence, the evidence of existence. A person without a shadow was not invisible. They were incomplete. And so they included the shut in spells, in prayers, in statues. Coffins sometimes had small carved recesses or panels where the shadow could rest. In temples, shadows were part of ritual. Standing in the sun, letting it touch your feet was a form of spiritual tuning, as if aligning your shadow meant aligning your soul. One famous funerary text even offers the spell, "Come my shadow and be united with me." Do not go away from me in the realm of the dead. It's intimate, almost affectionate. You weren't complete without it. And now yours is still with you. You turn slowly, gently, and see it there cast faintly in the eternal dusk of the field of reeds. Not dark, not sinister, just you slightly detached. It nods. You nod back. There's no need to speak, because your shadow knows. It's been with you through all of it. The judgment, the jars, the sand, the false door, the name whispered back to life. It followed your ba through the underworld and back. It curled at your feet during rituals. It swayed beside you, as your heart was weighed. It has waited, and in a way it remembers you better than you do, because it isn't bound by words or form. It's your shape, yes, but also your silence, your instinct, your unseen outline. And as your spirit rises now to continue its eternal wandering, your shadow stretches with you, not behind, not below, but beside you. And that's the wonder of the shoot. It's not a lesser soul. It's not an echo. It's the part of you that never had to speak because it's always been there, watching, waiting, whole. Your shadow walks beside you now, not tethered, not dragged along, but moving like a second thought, a calm one. It no longer needs sunlight to exist, no sharp beam to summon its shape. Here in the afterlife, your shout is constant, whole, unfazed by light or time. But it's not just your shadow, you notice. It's others. They flicker and glide beside their souls too, some large and deliberate, some faint and fragile. One dances slightly ahead of its owner like a curious dog. Another moves reluctantly hanging back near the walls of a temple in disrepair. This is how you realize you're not the only one who made it here. Not just individuals either. Families. Because as much as the Egyptians believed in the journey of the individual soul, they were just as deeply invested in the idea that you do not cross into the next life alone. The dead formed households, circles, dynasties. Your afterlife wasn't just a solo vacation, it was a generational reunion. Imagine your grandmother waving you in from a field of celestial onions. Your great-grandfather calling you over to sit beneath a sycamore tree he planted in 1472 BCE. Your second cousin, 4 times removed, offering you a cup of dream wine and a mildly exaggerated story about his military service. In tombs across Egypt, scenes like this were painted on purpose. You didn't just decorate your burial chamber with gods and judgments. You included your loved ones, your family, your social life. These weren't just depictions of memory, they were invitations. The goal wasn't to leave them behind, it was to meet again. Often you'd see full banquet scenes, the deceased seated at a table, overflowing with offerings, and beside them their parents, or spouse, or siblings. In some cases, children who died young, but were aged up in the art to show that they'd continue to grow and thrive in the afterlife. One especially touching tomb in Deir el-Medina shows a man sharing a plate of bread with his wife. No gods, no pharaohs, just 2 souls in eternal breakfast. And this isn't just symbolic. The Egyptians believed relationships continued beyond death. If you were married, you could stay married. If you were widowed, you could reunite. And if you had enemies, well, let's just say some spells included polite little clauses, like may I never be seated near my brother-in-law. Family was not just social, it was cosmic infrastructure. Your lineage shaped your access to priesthoods, land, even burial rites. And once you passed on, you became part of that spiritual support network. You weren't just with your family, you were of your family. That's why names passed down through generations mattered so much. You weren't just honoring the past, you were keeping it active, keeping it present, and sometimes you weren't just welcomed by family, you were welcomed into it. Marriage existed in the afterlife. Couples could be reunited or paired anew. There's even fringe speculation that particularly devoted servants might be adopted by the household they served in life. You could spend eternity with the people who mattered most to you, not because blood demanded it, but because bond did. Quirky detail of the night. Some tombs show pets in family banquets, dogs seated politely at the table, cats with dedicated food bowls. One wall painting even shows a monkey reaching for a fig on the offering plate. No one seems to mind. But not all family reunions were idyllic. Some tomb texts include appeals to ancestors, help me grandfather to reach the field of reeds, or mother speak my name before Osiris. Because just like in life, family could be supportive or complicated. You might need to call in a cosmic favor or clear up an old argument through prayer. Still, the underlying belief remained: no one crosses the Nile alone. Even kings imagined themselves arriving in the next world surrounded by their ancestors, their grandfathers carved into stone alongside them, their sons buried nearby, ready to pick up the royal baton or the divine beer jug. Historians still debate whether this eternal family reunion was taken literally by everyone or if it was a metaphor for spiritual unity. But the consistent appearance of kinship in tombs, spells, and offerings makes one thing clear. Though ancient Egyptians couldn't imagine eternity without connection, and now you feel it. Your ba floats toward a grove of reeds where someone stands with arms open. You don't recognize the face immediately, but there's something familiar in the stance, the curve of the smile, the tilt of the head. Then suddenly, like memory returning in a wave of warm wind, it's them, a parent, a child, a sibling, someone you lost, someone you missed. They're not younger, they're not older, they're just perfect. And they speak your name, not loudly, just enough. And with that single word, something inside you becomes more whole than it's been in 1,000 years. You are seen, you are family, you are home. You sit together for a long time on the edge of a pond, so still it feels like the first water ever made. The breeze nudges the papyrus reeds. Your feet dangle just above the surface. The person beside you, the one you've waited so long to see again, doesn't need to say much. They're here, and so are you. But as eternity settles around you, you feel a faint ripple of curiosity. Not anxiety, just wonder. Because if you and your family and your friends can all live again in the afterlife, what about your enemies? Yes, even here among fields of peace and reed huts filled with warm laughter. The ancient Egyptians had a plan for those who, let's say, weren't very neighborly, because while they built the afterlife on ideals of balanced truth and reunion, they also accounted for chaos, and they had a name for it, Isfet. If Ma'at was the cosmic order, the smooth divine logic that held the world together, then Isfet was the opposite, chaos, untruth, violence, unraveling. And just as Ma'at had a feather and a goddess and a sacred presence, Isfet had forms too, serpents, darkness, storms, and the occasional very rude neighbor. So tonight we slip into the shadow side of eternity, not to scare you, but to understand just how seriously the Egyptians took the idea that some souls might not make it, or worse, might come back wrong. We've already met one consequence being devoured by Ammit after the heart weighing. That was spiritual annihilation, one and done, erased. But what if you passed judgment and still brought your bad attitude into the afterlife? Enter the concept of restless dead souls who didn't find peace, maybe because they weren't buried properly, maybe their names were erased, maybe they were wronged, or maybe they were just petty in life and stayed petty in death. The Egyptians had spells to deal with them. Tomb walls included protections not just for the deceased, but against other spirits. Spells warded off those who slink in shadows, who snatch the breath from the nostrils, or who speak untrue words. These weren't metaphors. They were active threats in the spiritual ecosystem, and they weren't always strangers. Some texts suggest that jealous relatives, or even former friends, could try to sabotage you in the next world. May my enemy not see the light, one man wrote in a prayer, and may his mouth be closed when he approaches the throne of Osiris. It's like ancient social media blocking, but with papyrus and curses. And then there were vengeful ghosts. Yes, really. Some Egyptians believed that a person who died wronged or angry might return, causing illness, bad dreams, or even household accidents. Letters to the dead survive, where people beg their deceased relatives to please stop haunting the house. One man wrote to his dead brother-in-law, "I've done all the offerings. What more do you want? Please leave us alone." Others took it further. They consulted oracles, asked priests to banish angry spirits, or hired ritual specialists to calm the dead with spells and offerings. A broken plate, an odd sickness, or a string of bad luck. It could be a sign that someone was whispering from the shadows. And what about curses? Ah, yes. These weren't movie-style explosive plagues, but some tombs did include written warnings, polite but pointed. Things like, "As for any man who shall enter this tomb, in evil may the crocodile be against him in the water, the snake against him on land, the hippopotamus against him in the shallows." It's oddly specific, and also deeply effective, because while curses weren't the norm, the fear of cosmic justice absolutely was. Still, the Egyptians didn't dwell on punishment. They didn't fixate on fire and brimstone. Their afterlife wasn't built on fear, it was built on order, which meant that the wicked didn't burn forever. They simply weren't. They failed the judgment. They lost their name, their body decayed, their ba dissolved, oblivion. But for the living, it was worth being cautious. They carried amulets shaped like protective deities, wrote protective spells on their coffins, whispered the correct passwords to the gates of the underworld, and sometimes they took no chances. One priest had a statue made of himself with his name carved backwards, just in case someone tried to curse him. It might not have worked, but it shows how far people would go to shield their soul. Even in death, Egyptians respected the risk of Isfet. But here's the thing, they didn't fear it constantly, because most of the time the rituals worked, the spells held, the amulets did their job, and the vast majority of souls they didn't haunt. They thrived, which is where you are now. Sitting beneath the stars, warm breeze across your face, shadow at your side, family nearby. You've passed the judgment. You've remembered your name. You've spoken your spells. You are safe, but the universe, it stays balanced because it remembers the possibility of chaos, and it guards against it. So you light a tiny oil lamp, just one. You place it by the path, a small flame, for protection, for memory, for peace. And just like that, Ma'at is upheld. The little flame flickers at your feet. It gives off no smoke, but it seems to hum quietly with the rhythm of eternity. You don't need to tend it. Here it never burns out unless you let it. And as you rise from your place in the field of reeds, your Ka turns to look at you not with concern, but with focus. Because tonight, It's time to understand the most mystical part of your soul. You've met your Ba, the fluttering, personality-filled part that flies home each night. You've honored your Ren, your name. You've acknowledged your Sheet, your shadow. But now we step into the glow of something greater. The part of you that becomes divine, the Ak. Translated loosely, Ak means the effective one or transfigured spirit. But really, it's your final form, the culmination of everything you were and everything you've become. It's not automatic. You don't get to wake up dead and say, I'm Ak now. No. This transformation is earned through judgment, through ritual, through memory and truth. And when it happens, it's not just a personal achievement, it's cosmic. Let's walk through it. When you pass the weighing of the heart, when your Ka is nourished, when your Ba is intact, and your name is spoken, you undergo a kind of spiritual, alchemical shift. You're no longer just a soul. You become luminous, a living force of light wisdom and sacred power. An Ak is not a ghost. An Ak is not a spirit roaming tombs. An Ak is glory. In hieroglyphs, it's written as an ibis, perched on a standard, a bird associated with Thoth god of writing and magic. But the Ak is linked just as strongly to the stars. It was believed that the blessed dead became Aku, shining ones in the sky. You might become a star in the northern firmament, never setting, always visible. Or you might ride in the solar bark with Ra, battling chaos each night and renewing the world with the sunrise. Either way, you're not just in the afterlife. You're part of the cosmic machine, and this wasn't limited to royalty. Yes, pharaohs were expected to become Ak as part of their divine role, but the Book of the Dead includes spells for everyone to become Ak. One popular spell even proclaims, I am an Ak more powerful than the gods. I go where I wish. I do what I desire. Talk about a spiritual upgrade. But it wasn't just about personal enlightenment. The Ak had responsibilities. An Ak could intervene in the world of the living. If your descendants needed help, say with a bad harvest or a particularly tricky neighbor, you could appear in dreams, whisper advice, offer protection, or even serve as a kind of guardian spirit for the family tomb. You could also travel between the realms, visit temples, participate in festivals, speak with the gods. You weren't bound by gravity or obligation. You were free, but with that freedom came expectation. You had to uphold Mahat even in this exalted form. An Ak that turned selfish or chaotic was not just frowned upon, it was dangerous. Some spells warn against false Ak or Ak of evil who might deceive or lead others astray. There were even counter spells to defend against a corrupted Ak. Quirky fact of the night, some families requested protection not from demons or serpents, but from jealous Akos spirits of former rivals or angry in-laws who might try to crash the party of eternity. The cosmic bureaucracy is real even for the luminous. But let's focus on the beauty of it. To be Ak is to be whole, not torn between body and soul, not waiting for offerings, not vulnerable to time or forgetting. It's the moment your essence clicks into place, like a pyramid capstone settling on top of a perfect structure, and you're not alone. All around you in the field of reeds, you begin to see it. The glow around your ancestors, the shimmer in the air when they speak, that soft gleam in your own hands when you lift them toward the stars. You're all becoming Ak slowly, naturally, as the rituals unfold across time. It's not like crossing a finish line. It's like waking up to the fact that you were always meant to shine, and sometimes an Akh returns to the living world for a purpose, a dream, a warning, a blessing. There's a story from the New Kingdom where a man receives a dream from his deceased father. The message: "You forgot my offering last week." Polite, a little petty, but deeply Akhish. The father isn't suffering, he's just making sure things stay balanced. And the son, he delivers the offering the next day, because when the Aksh speaks, you listen. Historians still debate whether this luminous form was considered permanent or if there were higher states beyond Aksh. Some texts hint at merging with Ra or returning to the primordial waters from which all life sprang. But no matter, the path beyond becoming Akh was the goal, the confirmation that you'd made it. Not just to the afterlife, but into meaning. You float now a little lighter. The wind no longer moves around you, it moves with you. A star glints above, and for the first time you wonder, is that you? It might be. You speak your name once more, not as a plea, but as a proclamation. And the night listens, because now you are effective. You are luminous. You are Akh. You glow now, not with fire, not with heat, but with something older, something still. The air doesn't press against you anymore. It flows through you, as if you've become part of the atmosphere, the skase, the light that bends on the Nile at dusk. You are Akh, effective, luminous. And now you begin to understand something the Egyptians knew from the beginning, though they rarely said it out loud. The afterlife was never about escaping death. It was about learning to live again correctly in rhythm with the cosmos. And to do that, to sustain yourself in this state, you needed more than offerings, more than spells, more than the occasional festival loaf and ancestral dream cameo. You needed Ma'at. Tonight, your journey brings you back to the concept that underpinned everything. Ma'at wasn't just a goddess. She was the foundation of reality. She wasn't an optional virtue. She was the software running the universe. If you broke her, things didn't just become morally bad. They became non-functional. And as an Aksh, you now move through her completely. Let's walk through what that means. Ma'at is often depicted as a woman with a single feather on her head. That's the one you remember from your heart weighing the lightest object, the standard of cosmic balance. But Ma'at wasn't just for Judgment Day. It was for every day. It governed the rising of the sun, the flooding of the Nile, the honesty of merchants, the loyalty between spouses, the fairness of scribes. Even gods had to obey Ma'at. Even Ra had to speak her name each morning as he boarded the solar bark, pushing back chaos one sunrise at a time. She wasn't law. She was order. She was harmony, proportionality, rightness. You didn't believe in Ma'at. You lived inside her, and now you float within her like a grain of light within a sunbeam. But living in Ma'at wasn't always easy. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being true. That's why the negative confession in the Book of the Dead isn't a list of commandments. It's a testimony. I did not lie. I did not cause pain. I did not hoard food while others starved. It's personal, direct, behavioral, ethical. One quirky line even declares, I did not make others weep unnecessarily, which might be the oldest known version of don't be a jerk for fun. And the Egyptians understood that Ma'at wasn't something you just achieved. You had to participate in it constantly. That's why offerings mattered. Rituals, temples, fair business, speaking truth. Even in the afterlife, these patterns continue. You see it in the way that Akhe spirits care for the dead who've been forgotten, repeating their names, maintaining their tombs, inviting them into festivals. You see it in the way priests still living perform rites for kings who died centuries ago, not out of habit, but because Ma'at requires maintenance. And you see it most clearly in the stars. The circumpolar stars, the ones that never set, were known as the imperishable ones. The Egyptians believed the souls of the righteous became part of that rotation, gliding forever in a loop that held up the sky. They weren't just scenic, they were functional. Their motion, their balance kept Ma'at alive. And now so do you. Because that's what Akh truly means. Not just luminous, not just effective, but upholding. Not passively, not selfishly, but with presence, purpose, and perhaps with a little gentle sarcasm too, because even the Book of the Dead has a sense of humor. One spell assures you that you'll never eat excrement or drink urine in the afterlife, which implies someone clearly had that concern on their checklist. So yes, ancient Egyptians worried about balance, but they also worried about dignity. And now, drifting over a river of starlight, you begin to see how the whole journey fits together. The mummification, the jars, the weighing, the fields, the festivals, the ancestors, the name, the light. It wasn't superstition, it was structure, a way to continue, a way to contribute. Historians still debate whether Ma'at was understood primarily as divine will or more as social contract, a kind of mutual agreement with the universe. But to the Egyptians, it likely didn't matter. What mattered was doing it, acting with care, speaking with truth, giving when you could, restoring what was broken, remembering those who couldn't speak their names anymore. It was all part of Ma'at, and you glowing softly now in this celestial hush feel something inside you settle into perfect alignment, not satisfaction, not pride, just rightness. You weren't meant to conquer death. You were meant to complete something, and now you have. The water beneath you stills. A single feather drifts down from the sky. It lands on your shoulder and vanishes. So much of the afterlife, you realize, isn't about what you gain, it's about what you keep. Not your gold, not your titles, not even your flawless eyeliner, though that certainly helps. What survives is your balance, your truth, your name echoing off stone, your Ak burning steady in the sky. But tonight, something shifts again. Not violently, not like judgment or rebirth. It's quieter than that. You feel a pull, not away from the afterlife, but deeper into it. A subtle gravity like the current beneath the Nile, nudging you towards something older than any spell, older than the pyramids, older than the gods themselves. And you realize you're being called to the Duat, not the tomb, not the field of reeds, not paradise, the underworld, but not in the way you imagined it. Forget demons with pitchforks or eternal torment. The Duat isn't punishment, it's process. It's the engine beneath the cosmos, the backstage corridor behind the stage of life, death, and stars. The Egyptians didn't see it as hell. They saw it as transformation. You enter it each night with the sun god Ra as he sails through its 12 gates, fighting off the serpent Apophis and ensuring the sun will rise again. But the Duat isn't just his realm, it's yours too. Because even in the afterlife, there are layers, not a hierarchy, more like an ecosystem. The Duat is where souls pass through, are tested, shaped, and finally illuminated. And now, as your Akash strengthens, you're no longer a tourist, you're a participant. The journey through the Duat was mapped in ancient texts like the Amduat, the Book of Gates, and the Book of Caverns. They describe glowing rivers of fire caverns guarded by serpents, rooms full of souls still waiting for their names to be spoken. You pass by them now, not in fear, but in understanding. One soul stands knee-deep in stars, unable to speak. Another floats near a gate guarded by Sekhmet the lioness, who sees lies the way fire sees dry wood. And all around, massive beings, part human, part animal, part myth, stand in silence holding the balance. This is not a place of punishment. It's a labyrinth of becoming. You realize many souls never reach the field of reeds because they're still in here wandering, learning, remembering what they forgot. They aren't evil, just unfinished. And you're here as a guide. As an Ak, you've reached a state of clarity. Now you return to the Duat, not to be judged, but to help uphold the cycle. You find a soul huddled near a pillar of shadow. She has no name, no voice. Her ba flickers erratically. You kneel, place your hand on her shoulder, speak her name, not the one you knew, but the one she forgot. She looks up, and suddenly she shines. That's how the Duat works, not with lightning, with recognition. Each gate opens not with keys, but with memory, with identity, with the echo of who you were becoming again, who you are. Quirky note for the night. Some ancient illustrations of the Duat include rooms where giant ears sit on thrones, literal ears, listening for truth. If you spoke falsely, the ear remained closed. But if you told your story truly, the door opened. It's bizarre. It's brilliant. Because sometimes the only thing standing between you and transformation is being heard. You continue down a corridor lined with stars and crocodile-headed gods, and everywhere you go the same pattern repeats: confusion, recognition, light. You're not preaching, you're not judging, you're reminding. And slowly the Duat begins to shimmer, not with fear, but with movement, with souls realigning, with names rising like lotuses. Some of the old texts describe the Duat as cyclical. Each night Ra sails through it, reborn at dawn. But now you understand, so do you. Each night, your soul returns here to assist, to protect, to restore balance. And when the sun rises, so do you, in perfect time with the sky. Historians still puzzle over whether the Duat was meant as a literal underworld or a metaphor for psychological transformation. But for the Egyptians, it wasn't a riddle. It was a fact, a cosmic path, and one you walk again and again, until you don't have to, until every soul has remembered its name, until every shadow has returned to its light, until Maat holds every corner. But that's not tonight. Tonight you step from the final gate. A gentle wind greets you, and on the horizon, Ra's bark rises once more, pulling morning behind it like a sail. You've done your work. You've helped another name shine. And now you go home. You return quietly. No parade, no celestial trumpet fanfare, just the light of dawn pouring over the barley fields in the field of reeds, the air smelling faintly of mint and myrrh and the gentle whisper of water lapping against the shore. The sun is rising, but it's not just a new day. It's a completion, and you feel it deep within your Ak, that rare, delicate hum of something fulfilled, the full circuit, the spiral of life and death, and life again, drawn not in circles, but in an ever-widening coil, always returning, always expanding. You sit beneath your sycamore tree, the same one that grew for you the moment your ka passed into the afterlife. Its leaves shimmer faintly with green light. The breeze through its branches is warm not with heat, but with presence. Around you the familiar and the eternal. There's your favorite cup filled with beer that never goes flat. Your cat curled in her usual spot, purring without end. The chair you sat in during your youth, only now it doesn't creak. A reed flute plays in the distance, no musician in sight, but every note perfectly timed to the beat of your soul. You made it, not just to the end of a journey, but to its purpose, because the Egyptians never thought the afterlife was the reward. It was the proof that you lived truthfully, that you loved, that you fed the hungry, honored your ancestors, greeted your neighbor with kindness, that you, in the most human and beautifully flawed way possible, participated in the world with intention. And now you participate in the next one, not by ruling, not by floating idly, but by being fully, actively, joyfully. The field of reeds isn't a vacation, it's a continuation. Here you still grow your food, but the soil is always ready. You still visit your family, but no one ever runs out of time. You still worship the gods, but not from fear, instead from shared reverence. And sometimes, when the stars align just right, you return to the living. As a whisper in the hallway, as a glint in the eye of someone remembering your name, as a dream that smells like lotus and dust and warm bread. You don't haunt, you visit, because your name is still known, because your shadow is still steady, because your ren, your ba, your ka, your ak, they're still aligned, and most importantly, because someone somewhere is still lighting a candle for you, just a flicker, but it's enough. You close your eyes not to sleep, but to listen, to the pulse of Maat, to the music of silence, to the breath of a universe that still remembers how to speak your name. 300 words, and now as the last soft glow of afterlife twilight fades into silence, you breathe a little slower. You're not floating anymore. You're resting settled gently into the embrace of something ancient and kind. The river moves softly in the distance. The reeds sway. The sky above is vast and deep, studded with stars that blink not randomly, but in perfect rhythm. Each one is a soul, a memory, a name that has not been forgotten, and you are one of them. There's no need to do anything now. No judgment, no ritual, no more gates to pass through. You've spoken your spells. You've remembered your name. You've walked the halls of Osiris and shared bread with the luminous. And you've come home. The breeze wraps around your limbs like linen. You feel the earth not beneath you, but with you, supporting, not pulling. The gentle hum of existence no longer distant, it's yours, like a lullaby, or the sound of someone you love exhaling beside you in the dark, the kind of peace that doesn't ask for attention. It just is. So lie back, so let the past drift like incense. Let your soul ease into silence. The stars are watching. The Nile is still flowing. And the gods, they are quiet now, because they know you've done well. Sleep peacefully. You are eternal. Word count 300.